You cry when a character dies. You get nervous during a scary scene. You cheer when the hero wins. But here's the paradox, you know none of it is real. So how can you feel real emotions about something you don't believe in? That's the core of the paradox. Emotions are supposed to come from belief. You're sad when someone dies because you believe it actually happened. But with fiction, you don't believe the event is real. You know the character doesn't exist. Yet you still feel sad, scared, angry, or happy. Let's take a clear example. You watch a movie where a young soldier writes a goodbye letter before dying in war. You tear up. You feel grief. But if someone asked you whether the soldier is a real person, you'd say no. So how can your feelings be real? There are a few ways to explain this. One idea is that emotion doesn't always need belief, it only needs imagination. When you see the soldier, your brain creates an emotional response based on what if, not what's real. You don't need to believe it's true to feel like it's true. Another theory is called suspension of disbelief. You temporarily act as if the story is real, even if you know it's not. For the duration of the story, your mind accepts the fiction just enough to connect emotionally. Once it's over, reality returns. But the paradox stays. How can we feel for someone we know doesn't exist? How can false stories cause real emotions? Either emotions don't require belief, or our beliefs are more flexible than we think. Imagine you're an inventor. One day, a stranger from the future gives you blueprints for a powerful new machine. You build it, become famous, and eventually, you travel back in time and hand those same blueprints to your younger self. Now ask yourself who invented the machine. You didn't design it, you just copied it from your future self. But your future self only had it because your past self received it from the future. The blueprints never had a point of origin. They just exist in a closed loop, passed from future to past and back again. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. Something exists without ever being created. Cause and effect collapse into a loop, where the effect becomes its own cause. It's named after the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, doing something impossible without any outside help. In this case, information or objects come into existence without any original source. One popular example is from Doctor Who. A character travels back in time with Beethoven's sheet music, hoping to meet the composer. But when he gets there, no one has ever heard of Beethoven, so he publishes the music himself. Now the question is, who actually composed it? The paradox challenges how we understand time and causality. Normally, A causes B, but here, A causes B and B causes A with no beginning. Some theories say time travel like this is impossible because it breaks causality. Others argue that in a universe with closed time loops, these things might just be uncreated but consistent. Still, the question lingers. If something exists only because it was passed to itself through time, is that the same as being created? Imagine a famous ship, the ship of Theseus, docked in a harbor. Over the years, its wooden planks begin to rot. Slowly, they are replaced one by one. After enough time, every single part of the ship has been replaced. Now here's the question, is it still the same ship? At first, most people say yes. It looks the same, it serves the same purpose, it changed gradually. But then imagine this, someone gathers all the original discarded planks and builds a new ship out of them. Now there are two ships, one made of all new parts and one made of the old ones. So which one is the real ship of Theseus? This is a paradox of identity over time. It asks whether something remains the same when all its parts have changed. If the new ship is the real one, then identity depends on continuity. If the old parts ship is the real one, then identity depends on materials. Now apply this to yourself. Every cell in your body changes over time. The molecules in your brain, skin, and bones all replaced slowly. So if everything inside you has changed, are you still you? Or take technology. If you replace every part of a car, is it still the same car? If you rebuild a computer with identical new pieces, is it still the same machine? The ship of Theseus shows us that sameness isn't so simple. Identity might depend on function, continuity, memory, or even just perspective. So here's the paradox. When something changes completely, yet keeps its name, history, and purpose, is it still the same thing? Imagine you invent a time machine. You travel back in time to the year before your grandfather met your grandmother. Now, for some reason, you stop them from ever meeting, maybe you distract them, maybe you accidentally cause something worse. The result, your parent is never born, and if your parent is never born, you are never born. But if you were never born, then who went back in time to stop your grandparents from meeting? This is the grandfather paradox, one of the most famous and disturbing problems in time travel. It creates a loop that destroys itself. Your actions in the past erase your own existence, but without your existence, those actions could never have been taken. It's a cycle with no stable answer. Here's how it breaks logic. If you succeed in changing the past, you prevent your own birth. If you are never born, you never go back. If you never go back, your grandparents do meet, and you are born. But then you go back and stop it again. It's a closed loop of contradiction. People have tried to explain this paradox in different ways. One idea is that time travel to the past is simply impossible. The universe doesn't allow it because it creates logical contradictions. Another idea is the self-healing timeline. Even if you try to interfere, time will find a way to correct itself. The gun jams, someone else gets in the way, or you fail. But there's a more modern interpretation, the many worlds theory. When you go back and change the past, you don't change your own timeline, you create a new one. In the new reality, your grandparents never meet, and you are never born in that universe. But the original timeline where you exist remains untouched. Still, the paradox remains powerful because it hits a nerve. What happens if cause and effect no longer work in order? Can the future change the past? And if so, is anything stable? Let's say you put a cat in a sealed box. Inside the box is a tiny bit of radioactive material, a Geiger counter, and a vial of poison. If the Geiger counter detects decay, even a single particle, the vial is broken and the cat dies. If it detects nothing, the cat lives. The catch, the chance of decay is 50-50 and you don't check the box. So what's happening inside the box before you open it? According to quantum mechanics, until the system is measured, it exists in a superposition. Both outcomes exist at once. That means, in theory, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. That's Schrödinger's cat, one of the most famous paradoxes in physics. Erwin Schrödinger invented it not to explain quantum theory, but to mock it. He was showing how strange, and maybe absurd, the idea of quantum superposition is when applied to everyday life. In the world of tiny particles, electrons can be in multiple states at once until they're observed. That's how quantum systems behave. But can a cat, a large, living being, also be in two states at once? Physicists disagree. Some believe that the moment the radioactive atom decays or not, the system collapses into one outcome even before the box is opened. Others believe that measurement, the act of opening the box, is what collapses the system. Until then, both outcomes are equally real. And then there's the many worlds interpretation. According to that theory, when you open the box, the universe splits. In one universe, you find a dead cat. In another, a living one. Both are real, you just happen to be in one of them. The paradox is less about cats and more about reality. Is the world fixed before you look, or do you help shape it just by observing? You're standing by a track. A runaway trolley is heading toward 5 people tied up on the tracks. You can't stop it, but there's a lever next to you. If you pull it, the trolley switches tracks and avoids the 5, but on the second track is 1 person. If you pull the lever, 1 person dies. If you do nothing, 5 die. What do you do? This is the trolley problem, a classic moral paradox. It pits 2 ethical values against each other. Do the most good save 5 lives, or don't take action that directly kills someone, don't become the cause of death. There's no perfect answer. Some say you should pull the lever, it's simple math, 1 life versus 5. But others say that pulling the lever makes you responsible for the death of an innocent person. If you do nothing, you didn't choose to kill anyone, the trolley did. But if you pull the lever, you actively killed someone. That weight is on you. Now imagine variations. What if the 1 person is your child? What if the 5 people are criminals? What if you could stop the trolley by pushing someone onto the tracks? Every twist exposes how our sense of right and wrong isn't purely logical. It's emotional, contextual, and often inconsistent. The trolley problem is used in psychology, law, medicine, and even AI ethics. For example, how should a self-driving car react in a no-win situation? Should it protect its passengers or minimize harm overall? This paradox doesn't have a solution, that's the point. It shows that morality isn't math, and sometimes every option feels wrong. Someone writes a sentence, this statement is false. Now stop and think. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be the case, meaning the sentence is false. But if the sentence is false, then what it says isn't true, which means the sentence is actually true. So is it true or false? That's the liar paradox, one of the oldest and most famous logical contradictions in history. It goes all the way back to ancient Greece. A version of it is known as the Epimenides Paradox, where a man from Crete says, "All Cretans are liars. If he's telling the truth, then he must be lying, but if he's lying, then he might be telling the truth." Let's bring it back to the simple version. If the statement is true, then it must be false. If the statement is false, then it must be true. It can't be both, but it also can't be neither. This loops forever, creating a sentence that collapses under its own logic. You've probably seen versions of this in daily life. Imagine someone says, "Everything I say is a lie." Is that sentence itself a lie? If it is, then maybe not everything they say is a lie, but if it's not a lie, then it's a lie again. Philosophers and logicians have wrestled with this paradox for centuries. It's not just a language trick, it reveals something deep about self-reference. When a statement talks about itself, normal logic starts to break. In modern logic, this led to developments like Tarski's hierarchy of language, which separates sentences from the sentences that talk about them. In computer science, it's connected to recursion and even the limits of programming systems that can't process their own definitions without crashing. The liar paradox is more than a word game. It shows that even simple language can produce infinite confusion. It asks one terrifying question: what if truth itself isn't stable? You walk into a store to buy a chocolate bar. There are 3 options: dark, milk, and white. Easy choice, you pick your favorite and go home happy. Now imagine the same store has 100 options: organic dark, sugar-free white, caramel-filled, chili-laced, Himalayan salted, mint, vegan oat milk. Suddenly, you don't feel so confident. You freeze, you second-guess. You worry, what if I pick the wrong one? That's the paradox of choice, the idea that more options don't always make us happier. In fact, too much choice can cause stress, doubt, and even regret. At first glance, this seems wrong. Isn't freedom good? Isn't having more options better than fewer? In theory, yes, but in practice, our brains don't handle it well. Psychologist Barry Schwartz popularized this paradox in his book, The Paradox of Choice. He showed that when people are given too many options, they often become less satisfied, not more. Why? Because more options mean more pressure. You're not just choosing what you want, you're choosing what to reject, and the fear of making the wrong choice grows. Regret increases. After choosing, you wonder if one of the other 99 options would have made you happier. Expectations skyrocket. With so many options, the perfect one must be in there. So when your choice is only okay, you feel disappointed. Analysis paralysis. You spend so long comparing options that you end up doing nothing. This paradox applies everywhere: choosing a college, picking a movie, online dating, even buying toothpaste. Real-life example: a famous study showed that people who saw 24 types of jam were far less likely to buy one than people who only saw 6. More choice equals less action. The paradox of choice reveals something important. Freedom isn't just about having options. It's about having options you can actually handle. Sometimes, less really is more. You're on a game show, 3 doors stand in front of you. Behind one is a car, behind the other 2 goats. You choose door 1. The host, Monty Hall, who knows what's behind the doors, opens door 3 and reveals a goat. Now he turns to you and asks, do you want to stick with your original choice or switch to door 2? You pause. There are 2 doors left. One has a car, one has a goat. Seems like a 50-50 chance, right? So why switch? Here's where the paradox kicks in. Switching actually gives you a 2-3 chance of winning the car. Sticking with your choice only gives you a 1-3 chance. It feels wrong, but the math is clear. Let's walk through it step by step. When you pick a door initially, say door 1, there's a 1-3 chance the car is behind that door and a 2-3 chance it's behind one of the other 2. Monty always opens a door with a goat, and he never opens the one with the car. That means he's giving you extra information. When he opens door 3, he's revealing that the car isn't there, but he's also concentrating the entire 2-3 probability onto the door you didn't pick and he didn't open. So if you switch, you're picking the door that originally had a 2-3 chance of hiding the car. If you stay, you're holding onto the 1-3 guess you made blindly. Still not convinced? Here's a way to think about it. Imagine the same game but with 100 doors. You pick door 1. Then Monty opens 98 other doors, all with goats. Only door 1, your pick, and door 37, unopened, remain. Would you still think it's 50-50? Probably not. It's clear that Monty's actions guided you toward the right door. Switching becomes the obvious choice. The Monty Hall paradox teaches us a strange truth. Your instincts about probability are often wrong. Math doesn't care what feels fair, it just tells you what is smart. Imagine a single grain of sand. Clearly, that's not a heap. Now add one more grain, still not a heap. Keep adding one grain at a time. At which point does it become a heap? Now go in reverse. You have a big pile of sand, definitely a heap. You remove one grain, still a heap. Remove another and another until you're left with a single grain. Somewhere along the way, the heap disappeared. But when? This is the Sorites paradox, also known as the Heap paradox, and it plays with vague terms like heap, bald, or tall. These aren't clearly defined. There's no single number of grains that definitely makes a heap, and no single one that destroys it. But the result is a contradiction. Gradual changes lead to a sudden shift in category without any exact moment where the change happens. Real-life example: when does someone go from young to old, from poor to rich, from clean to dirty? Language and perception are often built on fuzzy boundaries, but logic demands clear lines, and that's the heart of the paradox. Some philosophers suggest fixing the problem with fuzzy logic, a system where things are partly true or false in degrees. Others say the real issue is that language just isn't built for precision in everyday use. Either way, the Sorites paradox reminds us that many categories we rely on, heap, tall, smart, safe, aren't binary. They blur, but we often act like they're sharp lines. That assumption is where logic quietly breaks. Achilles, the great Greek hero, challenges a tortoise to a race, but to be fair, he gives the tortoise a head start. Once the race begins, Achilles runs much faster, but by the time he reaches the point where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved forward a bit. Then Achilles reaches that new spot, but again, the tortoise has moved slightly ahead. This continues forever. So the paradox asks, how can Achilles ever catch the tortoise if the tortoise is always a little ahead? This is one of Zeno's paradoxes, designed to show problems with motion and infinity. The idea is simple. If space and time can be divided infinitely, then motion itself becomes impossible. Achilles must cross an infinite number of points to catch the tortoise, but how can he do something infinite in finite time? It seems absurd. We know Achilles would outrun the tortoise, but Zeno's logic makes it feel impossible. The resolution comes from calculus. Mathematicians show that even though there are infinitely many steps, the total time those steps take can still be finite. Each step is smaller and faster than the one before, and their total can add up to a number. So Achilles does catch the tortoise in reality and in math, but the paradox still matters because it shows how our intuition about space, time, and infinity can break under close inspection. Even today, Zeno's paradoxes raise questions in physics and philosophy. Is space truly continuous, or is it made of tiny indivisible units? Is motion smooth or built on invisible jumps? Achilles may win the race, but Zeno still wins the argument. Nothing is as simple as it seems. Take a monkey, sit it at a typewriter, let it hit random keys forever. According to the infinite monkey theorem, that monkey will eventually type every book ever written. Shakespeare's Hamlet, the Bible, even this very script, all of it. The idea seems ridiculous. Monkeys don't write. Random typing is chaos. But mathematically, if the monkey types truly randomly and has infinite time, the odds of producing any specific sequence, no matter how long or complex, eventually reach 100%. Why? Because in an infinite timeline, every possible combination of letters must occur. Not just once, but infinitely many times. The complete works of Shakespeare, they're in there somewhere. So is a version with one typo, and a version with two typos, and a version where Hamlet is a talking toaster. It's not about monkeys or typewriters, it's about infinity and probability. The theorem is a metaphor for how randomness and time can produce structure, even meaning. It also appears in computer science and philosophy. For example, it relates to the idea of a universal Turing machine, a system that, given enough time and memory, can compute anything. Or the idea that in an infinite universe, there may be exact copies of Earth and of you. The paradox here isn't about whether it's likely, it's about how infinite time breaks our sense of logic. Randomness doesn't feel like it should produce order, but given enough chances, it always will. Still, don't go handing typewriters to monkeys. In 2003, a group of real monkeys in England were given a keyboard. They typed for a month. The result? Mostly the letter S, a lot of smashing, and a pile of monkey poop on the keyboard. Infinity, it turns out, is easier on paper than in real life. Most people think they have fewer friends than their friends do. That sounds impossible, but statistically it's true. This is the friendship paradox. The idea is simple. On average, your friends have more friends than you do. It's not just bad luck, it's math. Here's how it works. Imagine a network of people. Some are very popular and have lots of friends. Others are less connected. The popular people appear more often on other people's friend lists. So when you randomly look at someone's friends, you're more likely to land on someone popular. It's like a party. The people you see most are the ones who go to lots of parties. That doesn't mean everyone is more popular than you. It means that the people you're connected to are, on average, more connected than the average person. It's a bias built into networks. This paradox shows up in social media too. Your followers probably follow more people than you do. It can mess with your perception. You think everyone else is more social, more connected, more invited, but that's just a trick of perspective. The friendship paradox has real consequences. It affects how people feel about themselves. It creates social anxiety and the fear of missing out. But it's not personal, it's statistical. Even if you're average, your friends still seem above average. That's the paradox. Water is essential to life. You need it to survive. Diamonds are shiny rocks. You don't need them at all. So why are diamonds more expensive than water? That's the paradox of value. It confused philosophers and economists for centuries. Plato noticed it. Adam Smith made it famous. Water has high use value but low exchange value. Diamonds have low use value but high exchange value. How can something so necessary be cheap and something useless be expensive? The answer lies in marginal utility, the value of one more unit of something. Water is everywhere. One extra glass of water isn't worth much, but diamonds are rare. One extra diamond is special, so people pay more. The paradox isn't about total value, it's about relative value. What matters is availability and desire. A starving man in the desert would trade diamonds for water, but in a store surrounded by taps and bottles, diamonds win. This paradox teaches us something big. Value isn't objective, it's situational. Economic systems aren't based on usefulness, they're based on scarcity and preference. That's why luxuries cost more than necessities, and it's why we sometimes forget what's truly valuable. Judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but it will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the executioner arrives." The prisoner thinks, "If I'm still alive by Thursday night, the hanging must be Friday." But that wouldn't be a surprise, so it can't be Friday. Then he thinks, "If it can't be Friday and I'm still alive by Wednesday night, then Thursday's not a surprise either." He keeps reasoning backward. Eventually, he concludes, the hanging can't happen at all. It would never be a surprise, but then comes Wednesday. The executioner arrives, the prisoner is shocked, he didn't expect it. That's the paradox. His reasoning said it was impossible, but it happened, and it was a surprise. The unexpected hanging paradox is about logic and prediction. The more the prisoner thinks, the less he believes it's possible, but his logic undermines itself. By ruling out all days, he tricks himself into total disbelief. That's what makes the surprise work. This paradox challenges the link between knowledge and prediction. It shows how reasoning can fold in on itself, and it leaves one strange truth. If you think too hard about some things, you make them more confusing, not clearer. You walk into a room with 23 people. What are the odds that 2 of them share the same birthday? You might guess something low, maybe 5% or 10%, but the real answer is over 50%. With just 23 people, there's a better than even chance that 2 share a birthday. This is the birthday paradox. It doesn't feel right because we tend to think linearly. There are 365 days in a year, so it seems like you'd need hundreds of people to get a match. But the paradox isn't asking if someone shares your birthday. It's asking if any 2 people in the group share a birthday. That changes everything. It's about pairs. In a group of 23 people, there are 253 possible pairs. Each of those pairs has a chance to match. The more pairs, the higher the chance. With 57 people, the probability jumps above 99%. The math behind it is solid, even if your intuition says otherwise. This paradox shows how our brains misjudge probability. We underestimate how quickly chances add up. It's a lesson in how randomness works and how we often misunderstand it. That's why casinos win, why coincidences happen more than we think, and why even small groups can surprise us. A soldier wants to leave the army by proving he's insane. But there's a rule: if he wants to leave, it means he's sane. Wanting to escape war is rational, and rational people can't be considered insane. So he's stuck. That's a catch-22. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22, where rules are circular and self-defeating. You can't get out unless you're crazy, but if you try to get out, you're proving you're not crazy. It's a paradox of logic and bureaucracy. The system sets up a rule that invalidates itself. You're trapped by conditions that contradict each other. Real-world examples are everywhere. You can't get a job without experience, but you can't get experience without a job. You need money to make money. You must have freedom to fight for freedom. Bureaucracies, policies, and institutions are full of these loops. The Catch-22 paradox reveals how logic can be used to trap people. It shows how authority can hide behind rules that seem rational but are impossible to beat. It's not just a paradox, it's a warning. Sometimes systems aren't broken. They're designed that way. You're given two envelopes. One has twice as much money as the other. You pick one, but before opening it, you're told you can switch. You start to think, if my envelope has X, then the other might have 2X or X2, so the average of switching is higher, I should switch. But then the same logic applies again. No matter what you pick, switching always seems better. That leads to a loop. You should always switch, but that can't be right. The paradox is in the expectation calculation. You're using the variable X as if it's fixed, but in this setup, it's not. Once you assume one envelope has X, the other must be either X2 or 2X, but you don't know which one is which. The math breaks because you're basing decisions on uncertain assumptions. You're treating both envelopes as potentially holding the smaller or larger amount at the same time. This creates a contradiction, infinite switching. One way to resolve it is to fix the amounts before the game. If you know one envelope has $10 and the other $20, the logic stops being circular. But in uncertainty, the illusion returns. The two envelopes paradox teaches a strange lesson. Sometimes logic fails when probability is built on the unknown, and when every option looks better than the one you have, you might end up chasing nothing. Imagine you're standing in front of two boxes. Box A is transparent and contains exactly $1,000. Box B is opaque, you can't see inside, and it either contains $1 million or nothing. A superintelligent predictor, known to be almost always correct, has already made a decision based on what it predicted you would do. If it predicted you would take only box B, it placed $1 million inside. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it left box B empty. Now you have to choose. Do you take only box B, trusting the predictor's accuracy and hoping for the million? Or do you take both, thinking that no matter what, box B is already filled or not, so you might as well grab the extra 1,000? At first glance, it feels like a simple case of maximizing your profit. If box B already contains $1 million, then taking both boxes gets you an extra 1,000 for free. If box B is empty, taking both still gives you $1,000 rather than nothing. From this perspective, taking both seems like the rational move. But that logic collapses once you factor in the predictor. The whole setup depends on the idea that your decision is being predicted with high accuracy. If the predictor knows you're the kind of person who would take both, it would have left box B empty. If it believes you'd take only box B, it would reward you with the million. That means your very type of reasoning is influencing what's in the box, even though the decision was made in the past. So now you face a paradox between two views of rationality, causal decision theory and evidential decision theory. Causal reasoning says your choice doesn't affect the past. The boxes are already filled. Evidential reasoning says your choice reveals information about what the predictor likely did. If you take only box B, it's strong evidence that the predictor expected it, so you're likely to be rewarded. This paradox is more than a thought experiment. It challenges our understanding of free will, determinism, and prediction. It's used in artificial intelligence and game theory to explore how agents should act in situations involving powerful predictors. It raises questions like, can future expectations influence present choices? Should you act based on what is or based on what is likely? There's no universally accepted answer. Some say always take both, others say trust the predictor. But either way, Newcomb's paradox forces you to question what it means to make a rational choice when the future and the past feel entangled by logic. In a small town, there is exactly one barber, and he follows a strict rule. He shaves all the men in the town who do not shave themselves, and only those men. If a man shaves himself, the barber leaves him alone. If he doesn't, the barber takes care of it. At first, it seems like a perfectly neat system, but then someone asks a very simple question: who shaves the barber? Think about it. If the barber shaves himself, that violates the rule because he only shaves men who do not shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then according to the rule, he must shave himself. Either option leads to a contradiction. This is the Barber Paradox, introduced by Bertrand Russell as a simplified version of a deeper logical problem in set theory. It's an example of a self-referential paradox where a rule breaks down when applied to itself. In logical terms, Russell used it to illustrate what happens when we try to define a set of all sets that do not contain themselves. If such a set exists, does it contain itself or not? If it does, then it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then it should. The same circular logic applies to the barber. You might think there's a simple fix. Maybe the barber is not from the town, maybe he's exempt from the rule, but that misses the point. The whole structure of the paradox is built on applying a universal rule to every case, including the one enforcing it. This paradox isn't just an abstract game. It shows up in programming, recursive functions, law, who governs the governor, and even in daily life can a rulebook regulate itself. The moment a rule tries to include itself in its own scope, you invite contradiction. The resolution, in set theory, Russell proposed type theory to prevent sets from including themselves. In everyday life, we often rely on meta-rules or external systems to avoid circular logic. The Barber Paradox reminds us that not everything can be self-contained, and that sometimes, asking, "What about the one who enforces the rule?" breaks the whole system. A woman named Sleeping Beauty agrees to a psychological experiment. On Sunday, she's put to sleep. While she's asleep, a fair coin is flipped. If the coin lands heads, she is awakened on Monday, asked a question, and then the experiment ends. If the coin lands tails, she is awakened on Monday, asked the same question, put back to sleep, and awakened again on Tuesday, but with her memory erased so she won't remember Monday. Each time she wakes, she's asked, "What is the probability the coin landed heads?" Your first instinct might say 50-50, it's a fair coin. It was flipped once, that shouldn't change. But here's the twist, if it landed heads, there's one awakening. If it landed tails, there are two. From Beauty's perspective, she's more likely to be waking up in the tails world because there are more total wake-ups in that case. So should she answer 1-3 for heads and 2-3 for tails? This is the heart of the paradox. Two schools of thought emerge. The thirder position argues that since there are twice as many wake-ups under tails, she should assign a 1-3 probability to heads. The halfer position argues that the coin is fair and flipped once, her memory loss shouldn't affect the probability, so the answer is 1-2. Philosophers and statisticians still debate which is correct. Both seem logical, but they come from different interpretations of probability, frequentist versus Bayesian, or event counting versus world counting. This paradox touches on deeper ideas about self-location, memory, and uncertainty. It asks, how should you reason when you're uncertain not just about the outcome, but about your place in time? If you don't know whether it's Monday or Tuesday, or if you've already lived this moment before, how do you assign probability? In a way, the Sleeping Beauty paradox is about identity under duplication. It forces you to confront the instability of memory and the illusion of a continuous self. And it shows how probability gets slippery when experience isn't a fixed point in time, but a blurred, uncertain loop. Picture a hungry donkey standing exactly between two identical piles of hay. Each pile is the same distance away, equally fresh, equally large. The donkey, unable to find any reason to choose one over the other, just stands there. Unable to decide, it starves. That's Buridan's ass, a philosophical paradox that challenges our understanding of free will, rational choice, and decision-making. At first glance, it sounds absurd. Why wouldn't the donkey just pick randomly? But the paradox isn't really about animals, it's about people, logic, and choice. If a perfectly rational agent is faced with two equally good options and has no reason to favor one, what should it do? One interpretation says that a perfectly rational decision-maker must have a reason to act. If no reason exists, no action follows, but this leads to paralysis. Another interpretation says that even without reason, agents can act arbitrarily, but then, is that still rational? Does acting randomly count as reasoned behavior? In real life, people face donkey dilemmas all the time. Two identical job offers, two roads home, two equally appealing meals. If you've ever spent too long trying to pick something from a restaurant menu, you've felt it, decision paralysis, when every option feels equal. Buridan's ass raises deeper questions about determinism and free will. If every action needs a cause or motive, what happens when there isn't one? Can we act without a reason, or does reason itself trap us? The paradox forces you to see how having no difference between choices can be just as paralyzing as having too many. And sometimes, the most human thing we do is choose, even when we don't know why. Imagine for a moment that the world around you, the sky, the people, even your own body, isn't real. It's a simulation. Not a dream, not a hallucination, but a fully detailed, computer-generated world created by an advanced civilization. You're not a player, you're a character inside it. That's the simulation argument. This idea was popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003. He posed it as a trilemma: one of three things must be true. Almost all civilizations at our level of technological development go extinct before becoming advanced enough to run ancestor simulations. Advanced civilizations don't bother simulating their ancestors. We are almost certainly living in a simulation. Think of it this way: if it becomes possible to run millions of simulations, then simulated beings would far outnumber real ones. And if you're one of billions of conscious minds, the odds that you're in a real world, rather than a simulated one, become very small. That's where the paradox begins. You feel real, you trust your senses, you live in a world governed by physics, biology, and time, but all of that could be code. Your memories could be data, your thoughts could be computations. Some argue we'd never know. A good enough simulation would be indistinguishable from reality. Others say glitches would expose it: déjà vu, coincidences, quantum randomness. But none of these are conclusive. The simulation argument isn't saying we are in a simulation, only that if certain things are true, it's highly probable. It plays with probability, logic, and perception. It asks you, how would you know the difference between a real world and a perfect fake? The deeper twist: if you believe we're in a simulation, do you act differently? Are your choices still meaningful, or are you just a program running a loop? The paradox doesn't destroy reality, it warps your sense of it. And sometimes, just asking the question changes how you see everything around you. Let's say you live in a free society. People are allowed to speak their minds, believe what they want, and live according to their values. That's tolerance. But now imagine this: what happens when someone uses that freedom to promote intolerance? What happens when a group uses the rules of a tolerant society to try to destroy it? This is the paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. He argued that unlimited tolerance can lead to the end of tolerance. If a society tolerates everything, including those who want to eliminate tolerance, then the tolerant people may eventually be wiped out, along with the very system that protected them. It feels backwards. Tolerance is supposed to be a good thing: open, kind, fair. But if you tolerate intolerant ideologies, you give them space to grow. They can use free speech to spread hate, use legal rights to dismantle laws, use democracy to install dictators. And once they have power, they don't play by the same tolerant rules. So the paradox is, to preserve a tolerant society, you may have to be intolerant of intolerance. But how do you draw that line? Who decides what is too intolerant? When does free speech become a threat? Real-world examples make the problem clear. Nazi propaganda in 1930s Germany used democratic platforms to destroy democracy. Extremist groups exploit open societies to recruit, radicalize, and spread. Social media can amplify intolerance until it drowns out moderation. The paradox of tolerance is both moral and practical. It asks whether freedom can protect itself or whether it must, at times, fight back. If you believe in kindness, openness, and freedom, this paradox says, you might have to defend them in ways that feel unkind, closed, and forceful. It's not a comfortable answer, but that's why it's a paradox, and why it matters more than ever. You see a black raven flying through the sky. You note, this raven is black. Another one passes, also black. Eventually, you form a general belief. All ravens are black seems logical, right? But now, suppose you see a green apple. According to logic, that also confirms the statement, all ravens are black. Why? Because it is not a raven and it is not black, so it doesn't contradict your claim. That's the Raven Paradox. Formally, the statement, all ravens are black, is logically equivalent to all non-black things are not ravens. So if you observe something that's not black and also not a raven, it technically supports the theory, but that feels wrong. Seeing a green apple shouldn't tell you anything about ravens. You didn't learn more about birds by looking at fruit. Yet, by the rules of logic, your belief has been confirmed, a contradiction between our intuition and formal logic. Philosopher Karl Hempel introduced this paradox to highlight the problem of confirmation theory. How do we decide when evidence supports a general statement? Does every non-black, non-raven add confirmation, or only observations of ravens? The paradox forces you to see that even correct logic can lead to uncomfortable or counterintuitive results. It's not that the logic is wrong, it's that the way we interpret it might be. Real-life implications stretch into science and hypothesis testing. If every confirming instance matters, do we need to observe everything, or only what's relevant? The Raven Paradox makes us reconsider how we gather evidence and how we know what we think we know. Imagine your brain has been removed from your body and placed in a vat of nutrients, wired up to a supercomputer. The computer sends electrical signals that perfectly mimic the real world. You see, hear, taste, touch, and think, all through digital signals. You believe you're living a normal life, but you're not. You're just a brain in a vat. This thought experiment is the modern cousin of Descartes, evil demon, and the ancestor of the Matrix. And it raises the terrifying question, how would you ever know if it's true? Every experience you have could be artificially generated. Your memories could be fake. Your sense of self simulated. You think you're typing on a keyboard or walking in the park, but really it's all inside your skull, disconnected from reality. That's the brain in a vat paradox. It challenges the foundation of knowledge. What can you truly know for certain? Philosophers use this to explore skepticism. If all experience can be faked, is knowledge even possible? If a brain in a vat says, "I see a tree," is it lying, or is it just describing its internal state? Some argue you can't disprove the hypothesis. Others say you don't need to. If everything functions consistently, then experience is what matters. Whether it's real or simulated doesn't change how you live. But the paradox lingers. Maybe you're not a brain in a vat, but could you ever be sure? Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Every room is occupied. There are no vacancies. But then, a new guest arrives. Can the hotel still accommodate them? Yes, here's how. Move the guest in room 1 to room 2, the guest in room 2 to room 3, and so on. Every guest shifts one room up. Now room 1 is free for the new arrival. That's Hilbert's hotel, a paradox of infinity. A full hotel can still have space. It doesn't stop there. What if infinite new guests arrive? No problem. Move every guest from room N to room 2N. All even-numbered rooms get filled. The odd-numbered rooms are now empty, infinite space made out of infinite fullness. This paradox was invented by mathematician David Hilbert to show how strange infinity really is. In normal life, if something is full, it's full. But with infinite sets, our intuition collapses. Infinity breaks the rules of arithmetic. You can add, subtract, and divide infinite quantities in ways that seem nonsensical. An infinite hotel can subtract an infinite number of guests and still remain full. That doesn't work in the physical world, but it's logically valid in mathematics. Hilbert's hotel is more than a brain teaser. It has real implications in cosmology, physics, and philosophy. Can the universe be infinite? Can time? If infinity behaves so strangely, can we ever fully understand it? The paradox makes you feel the weight of the infinite, not as an abstract concept, but as something that follows its own strange, absolute logic. Imagine you're sitting in a room, choosing between tea and coffee. You pause, weigh the options, and decide on coffee. It feels like a free choice. But what if every neuron that fired in your brain, every preference you had, every thought that led you there was determined by your genetics, your past, your environment? Did you really choose, or were you just following a path already carved? That's the paradox of free will. If the universe is governed by deterministic laws, and if your brain is part of that universe, then your choices are just outcomes of physical processes, meaning free will is an illusion. But if the universe isn't deterministic, if there's randomness or quantum unpredictability, then your actions are not chosen freely either. They're just random. So either everything is determined or it's random, but in neither case do you control it. This creates a deep philosophical dilemma. If you don't have free will, can you be held responsible for anything? Can there be morality, justice, or praise? And if you do have free will, how does it fit in a universe where everything happens for a reason? Some philosophers try to escape the paradox through compatibilism, the idea that free will can exist within determinism. That even if our decisions are caused, they can still be free if they come from our desires and not from external coercion. But others say that's just redefining the problem. It still doesn't explain how a self can rise above the chain of cause and effect. The paradox of free will forces us to ask, Are we authors of our own actions, or just characters reading from a script written by the universe? Let's say in the future teleportation is possible. You step into a machine. It scans every particle of your body, disassembles you, sends the information across space, and rebuilds you atom by atom on Mars. You wake up on Mars feeling like yourself. But here's the twist: the original version of you was destroyed in the process. Are you still you? Now imagine a modified version. The machine scans you, creates a perfect copy on Mars, but doesn't destroy the original. Now there are two of you. Both claim to be the real person. They share the same memories, same feelings, same identity. So who's the real one? This is the Teletransportation Paradox. It raises terrifying questions about identity and consciousness. If a copy of you is built atom by atom, is that still you? If you destroy the original, does the copy inherit yourself? And if two identical versions exist, which one has the right to say, "I am me"? This isn't just science fiction. It's a challenge to what makes us us. Is it our memories, our bodies, our continuity of experience? If you're copied perfectly, is the copy alive or just a replica with no soul? Some say there's no problem. If the copy is perfect, identity transfers. Others argue that something non-physical, a soul or continuity, is lost, that the real you dies every time the machine activates. The paradox cuts into the heart of consciousness, asking, are we more than the sum of our parts? And if you can be replicated, are you even unique at all? Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If yes, then it's not all-powerful because it can't lift the rock. If no, then it's also not all-powerful because it can't create the rock. Either way, omnipotence seems self-defeating. This is the Omnipotence Paradox. It questions whether the very concept of unlimited power makes sense or whether it collapses under its own logic. It sounds like a trick question, but it has serious implications for theology and metaphysics. If an all-powerful God exists, can he create limits he cannot overcome? Can he make himself cease to exist? Can he create a square circle? Some philosophers say the paradox is based on a flawed definition. That omnipotence doesn't mean the power to do the logically impossible. Creating a rock too heavy for yourself is like drawing a four-sided triangle. It's a contradiction, not a task. Others argue that if omnipotence can't include the impossible, then it's not truly all-powerful. The debate splits between two definitions, one where omnipotence includes logical paradoxes and one where it doesn't. The Omnipotence Paradox forces you to ask, can power be so total that it destroys itself? And more deeply, are there limits not even power can cross, not because they're too strong, but because they make no sense at all? Imagine a machine connected to a quantum event, say, the spin of a particle. Each time the machine is activated, it measures the particle. If the spin is up, you survive. If it's down, the machine kills you instantly. Now you sit in the machine and activate it once. You're alive, you do it again, still alive. Again, still alive. No matter how many times you try, you always survive. That's the quantum suicide paradox. This thought experiment comes from quantum physics, specifically the many worlds interpretation. According to that interpretation, every quantum event splits the universe into branches, one where the particle spins up and one where it spins down. When you use the suicide machine, the universe splits. In the universe where you die, you're gone, but in the universe where you survive, you continue. And in that world, you're always the version that lives. From your point of view, you are immortal. You never experience death. Every time the quantum event is measured, your consciousness continues in the world where you survived, even if the odds were incredibly low. That's why it's called quantum suicide. But the twist is, it's also quantum immortality. This paradox challenges our understanding of death, identity, and probability. If the many worlds theory is correct, does it mean you can never experience death? Does your consciousness always find the path where you survive, even if it's unlikely? Of course, from an outside perspective, most copies of you die. But you, the conscious observer, always find yourself in the surviving branch. That leads to an unsettling question. Are you destined to live forever, watching everyone around you disappear, while your consciousness drifts through increasingly unlikely universes? It's not a recommendation to test the idea. It's a challenge to how we think about observation, reality, and the fate of consciousness in a quantum world. You raise your right hand in front of a mirror. Your reflection raises its left, but why? The mirror doesn't actually know left from right. It doesn't flip your image horizontally, it flips it front to back. But it feels like left and right are reversed. That's the mirror paradox. This illusion messes with your brain because we live in a world where left and right are meaningful directions. When you look at a mirror, you expect the image to rotate like a photo, but it doesn't. It reflects, and that reflection is confusing because mirrors flip depth, not the horizontal axis. Your head stays on top, your feet stay on bottom, but your front becomes your back. So why does your right hand look like your reflection's left? It's because when you turn to face the mirror, your left and right orientations switch. It's you who's doing the flipping, not the mirror. If you hold up a sign with text, the mirror seems to reverse the letters. But again, only because the text is facing away from you, the mirror reflects it exactly. The paradox is not in the physics, it's in the perception. The mirror paradox is a reminder that our senses aren't always aligned with physical reality. What we see is filtered through mental models, and those models can trick us. Even more strangely, try this. Imagine a world with only up and down, no left and right. In that world, mirrors wouldn't seem paradoxical. It's the existence of symmetry in 3 dimensions that makes the reflection feel unnatural. The mirror paradox isn't a contradiction, but it shows how deeply orientation and perspective affect our understanding of space, motion, and even identity. Here's a simple idea. When you observe something, you change it. That's the observer's paradox. It shows up in science, psychology, sociology, and especially quantum physics. In social science, if you're watching someone to see how they behave naturally, they might act differently just because they know they're being observed. A security camera changes how people behave in a store. A therapist taking notes can affect how a patient speaks. Even in classrooms, students often perform better when they feel watched. The presence of an observer breaks the natural state. In quantum mechanics, the paradox gets stranger. Electrons don't have defined positions until they're observed. Light acts like a wave until you measure it, then it acts like a particle. The famous double-slit experiment shows that when no one watches, particles act unpredictably, but as soon as you observe them, they collapse into a defined outcome. This challenges the very nature of reality. Is the world fundamentally uncertain until we look at it? Does our observation actually determine what's real? Even in language, the paradox appears. If a linguist wants to study how people speak informally, their presence makes people speak more carefully. The act of studying behavior changes the behavior. The observer's paradox isn't just about experiments, it's about awareness. The world behaves one way when unobserved and another when we watch, and that means we can never study something without affecting it, even subtly. The paradox forces us to ask, can we ever know the true nature of things if the very act of looking distorts them? You're holding a lottery ticket. The odds of winning are astronomically low, 1 in millions, so you reasonably believe, I will not win. But here's the twist, someone must win. Every individual ticket is unlikely to win, yet collectively one ticket will. That's the lottery paradox. It starts with rational belief. For each ticket, it's rational to think it will lose, but if you believe that for every ticket, you're also believing no one will win, and that's clearly false because one ticket must. So how can it be reasonable to believe every single ticket will lose, while also knowing that one will win? This paradox exposes a flaw in how we think about probability, belief, and rationality. It shows that what's reasonable at the level of individual cases becomes unreasonable when applied to the group. The paradox isn't about lotteries, it's about epistemology, the study of belief. Philosophers ask, should rational belief always be closed under logical consequence? If you believe A and B and A plus B logically leads to C, should you also believe C? The lottery paradox suggests that this rule can break. You can rationally believe things that, taken together, are irrational. It also connects to everyday decisions. We believe that planes are safe, but any individual plane could crash. We trust medicine, though side effects exist. The lottery paradox reminds us that certainty is a luxury logic rarely affords. A man tells you, I have 2 children, one is a boy. What are the odds that both children are boys? You might think 50-50. Either the other child is a boy or a girl, but that's wrong. Let's break it down. The possible combinations of 2 children are boy, 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 girl, girl, boy, girl, girl. But we're told one is a boy, so we eliminate the girl-girl pair. That leaves 3 options. Of those, only one is boy, boy. So the probability is 1 in 3, or roughly 33%. Now imagine a variation. The man says, my older child is a boy. In that case, only two combinations are possible, boy-boy and boy-girl. Now the odds of both being boys are 1 in 2, a true 50-50. This paradox plays with the difference between probability and information. The way a fact is stated changes the outcome. You're not just calculating math, you're interpreting what information has been given and what hasn't. It's the subtle difference between, at least one child is a boy, and this specific child is a boy. The logic bends depending on context, not the numbers. The boy or girl paradox teaches us that in probability, how you ask the question changes the answer. How do you know your memories are real? You remember eating breakfast, walking to school, or having a birthday party at age 6. But what if those memories were implanted? What if they're false, reconstructed, or distorted? How would you ever know? That's the memory paradox. You rely on memory to confirm your past, but memory itself might be the thing deceiving you. Think about this. To verify that something happened, you need evidence. But your strongest evidence is often your own recollection. If memory is flawed, then the past becomes uncertain. And yet, you need memory to even begin questioning it. It's a loop you can't escape. Studies show that memory isn't a perfect recording. It's reconstructive. Every time you recall an event, your brain rewrites parts of it. Memories change over time. People can even have false memories, vivid, emotional recollections of things that never happened. In one study, participants recalled being lost in a mall as a child, a completely made-up event, yet they believed it. This creates a paradox of identity. If your memories are inaccurate, who are you really? If you forget key events or remember things that didn't occur, is your sense of self still real? The memory paradox isn't just philosophical, it's emotional. It affects trauma, nostalgia, regret, and guilt. You can't be certain your past is true, but you can't live without believing in it. So here's the loop: you need memory to know the past, but you need the past to trust your memory. And neither can stand without the other. A crocodile steals a child and tells the parent, "I will return the child only if you correctly guess whether I will return the child." If the parent says, "You will return the child," and the crocodile intends to return the child, everything is fine. If the parent says, "You won't return the child," and the crocodile plans not to return the child, again, all good. But now imagine the parent says, "You will not return the child," and the crocodile was originally going to return the child. Now the crocodile is stuck. If he returns the child, the parent's guess was wrong, so he shouldn't return the child. But if he doesn't return the child, the parent guessed correctly, and he should return the child. Any action contradicts the condition. This is the crocodile paradox, a self-referential loop where any answer breaks the logic. It's similar to the liar paradox. This statement is false because the statement flips itself, undermining its own validity. At its core, the paradox reveals the instability of conditional logic when it loops back into itself. It shows that statements about truth and prediction, when applied to themselves, can become unsolvable. In ancient logic, this kind of recursion is seen as a danger zone. Statements referring to their own outcomes create contradiction. It also raises moral questions. Should the crocodile honor the spirit or the logic of his condition? And if language itself breaks down, how do we build fair agreements? The crocodile paradox is absurd, cruel, and brilliant, and it shows how logic can collapse on its own foundation. If you aim directly for happiness, you might miss it. That's the paradox of hedonism. It suggests that the more you chase pleasure, the less likely you are to find it. People who obsess over being happy often feel empty, while those who focus on purpose, relationships, or curiosity find joy along the way without even trying. Imagine someone who wants to be happy above all else. They constantly ask themselves, "Am I happy yet?" But that question itself kills the mood. Like trying to fall asleep by focusing on falling asleep, the act of aiming at the goal disrupts the process. Philosopher John Stuart Mill said it best: ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. Happiness, it turns out, works best as a side effect. It emerges when you're immersed in something bigger than yourself. The paradox appears in relationships too. Someone who tries too hard to be loved might come across as needy. Someone who seeks constant pleasure may end up bored or addicted. The chase ruins the reward. This paradox challenges how we structure our goals. It asks, should you aim for happiness or live in a way that happiness naturally follows? True hedonism, it seems, is self-defeating. Real joy comes not from grabbing it, but from forgetting about it. A judge agrees to participate in a sleep experiment. Here's the setup. On Monday, she is put to sleep. A fair coin is flipped. If heads, she is woken up on Tuesday and released. If tails, she's woken up on Tuesday and again on Wednesday, but with memory of the first wake-up erased. She never knows what day it is. Now when she wakes up, she's told, "You're awake. What is the probability the coin landed heads?" At first glance, you might say 50-50, but think carefully. If the coin was heads, there is only one awakening, Tuesday. If it was tails, there are two awakenings, Tuesday and Wednesday. From the judge's perspective, 2 out of 3 awakenings happen in the tails scenario, so the probability should be 1-3 heads, 2-3 tails. But others argue this is flawed. They say, the coin is flipped once, not every time she wakes. The coin's outcome was 50-50 at the start, and nothing changes that. This paradox is a cousin to the more famous Sleeping Beauty paradox. It forces us to ask, does subjective experience change probability? If you lose track of time and memory, should your beliefs shift? It splits philosophers and mathematicians. Some side with the thirder position, 2-3 tails. Others side with the halfer position, 50-50. Both seem logical, depending on how you define a belief inside uncertainty. The Sleeping Judge paradox turns memory, time, and knowledge into a puzzle, and reminds us how fragile our sense of certainty really is. You've seen the sun rise every morning of your life, so you expect it will rise tomorrow. But how do you know that? That's the problem of induction, first clearly described by philosopher David Hume. It asks, what justifies our belief that the future will resemble the past? Induction is when you draw general conclusions based on repeated experience. Every swan you've ever seen is white, so you believe all swans are white until you see a black one. That one black swan destroys your certainty. The problem is that inductive reasoning relies on the assumption that the universe is stable. That nature follows patterns. But how do you prove that assumption? By looking at past patterns, which is circular logic. Hume's paradox shows that science, common sense, and daily life all rest on a fragile idea that what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. The laws of physics, medicine, cooking, driving, everything assumes consistency, but we can't prove consistency, we just trust it. This paradox shakes the foundation of all knowledge. It says, your entire understanding of the world depends on a habit, not a logical proof, and yet, without that habit, we couldn't function. It's not a practical problem, we still live our lives by patterns, but it's a deep philosophical one. It reveals that reason alone can't justify belief in the future. We believe anyway, because to doubt it completely would leave us frozen. Imagine someone saying, "It's raining, but I don't believe it's raining." That statement might be logically consistent, the speaker could be wrong about their belief, but it's deeply irrational. That's Moore's paradox. Named after philosopher G. Moore, this paradox highlights a weird clash between knowledge, belief, and communication. You can say, "It's raining," and you can say, "I don't believe it's raining." But putting both together sounds absurd, even if they might both technically be true. Why is it paradoxical? Because belief isn't just a statement, it carries an expectation of coherence. If you say it's raining, people assume you believe it, so saying both at once feels self-contradictory, even if it isn't by the rules of logic. This paradox reveals something about language and the mind. We expect people's words to reflect their beliefs. When they don't, we instinctively sense a problem. It's not a contradiction in facts, it's a contradiction in psychology. Moore's paradox shows that meaning isn't just about truth, it's about how truth is delivered. It makes us question what belief means and how we judge someone's sincerity, coherence, and awareness. An author writes a book filled with carefully researched claims. In the preface, they write, "Despite my best efforts, there are probably some errors in this book." That sounds reasonable, even responsible, but here's the paradox. If the author truly believes each individual claim in the book and stands by them all, then how can they also believe that some are probably false? That means they believe both, each of these is true, and at least one of these is not true. This creates a tension. On one hand, they must stand behind every statement they wrote. On the other, they acknowledge human fallibility and assume that something somewhere is likely wrong. That's the paradox of the preface. It's not about arrogance, it's about epistemology, the study of knowledge. We often believe sets of things while also believing that the set contains errors. Scientists publish papers they believe, while knowing science constantly corrects itself. Doctors give advice they trust, while acknowledging they could be mistaken. The paradox challenges the logic of belief aggregation. Is it rational to believe a collection of things individually while doubting the collection as a whole? It seems like it shouldn't be, but in practice, it often is. The paradox of the preface reveals a conflict between ideal reasoning and human humility. It reminds us that belief isn't always all or nothing. Sometimes we believe each piece, but not the puzzle. Imagine two hospitals. In Hospital A, 90 out of 100 patients survive a treatment. In Hospital B, 80 out of 100 survive. Seems obvious Hospital A is better, but now let's divide those patients by severity. In severe cases, Hospital A saved 30 out of 50, while Hospital B saved 40 out of 50. In mild cases, Hospital A saved 60 out of 50, which is impossible, but for the sake of example, let's say the numbers flip. Hospital A underperforms in every subgroup, yet looks better overall. That's Simpson's paradox. A trend appears in several different groups of data, but reverses when the groups are combined. It's not just math trickery, it's a warning. In statistics, context matters. Averages and totals can be misleading if they ignore how data is distributed. You might see this in education, sports, or hiring. A company could hire more women than another, but in each department hire fewer. Simpson's paradox reminds us that data without structure can deceive. It's not enough to ask what the numbers say, we must ask what they mean. If you don't consider confounding variables, you might draw the opposite of the truth. It's a paradox not because of contradiction, but because of how easily our brains accept simple summaries. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Imagine a new technology makes light bulbs use half the energy they used to. Logically, you'd think this reduces total energy use, but instead, people install more lights because they're cheaper to run. Energy use goes up. That's the Jevons Paradox. Improving efficiency and resource use can lead to more consumption, not less. It was first described in the 1800s by William Stanley Jevons. When steam engines became more efficient, coal use didn't go down, it exploded. Why? Because cheaper energy made factories, trains, and machines more profitable, so people used them more often. This paradox applies today. More efficient cars lead people to drive farther. Better air conditioners can mean more cooled space. Faster internet makes people use it more. The Jevons paradox challenges the assumption that technology always leads to sustainability. It shows that behavior, not just efficiency, drives outcomes. Saving energy per unit can increase energy use overall. It's a reminder that human systems are complex. You can't fix one part without watching how the others react. Sometimes, solving a problem creates a bigger one in disguise. Physics says the laws of motion are time-symmetric. If you reverse time, the equations still work. A ball falling looks like a ball rising in rewind, but in real life, time moves one way forward. Eggs crack but don't uncrack. Memories are of the past, not the future. Why? That's the paradox of the arrow of time. If the fundamental laws don't care about time direction, why does everything else? One answer lies in entropy, the measure of disorder. The second law of thermodynamics says that in a closed system, entropy always increases. A dropped glass shatters because there are more ways for the pieces to scatter than to stay whole. But here's the twist. If physics is symmetric, entropy should rise whether you move forward or backward in time. So why does it only rise in one direction? Some theorists believe the universe began in a highly ordered state, the Big Bang, and we're still playing out that long descent into chaos. But this explanation doesn't solve the paradox, it just shifts it. Why did the universe begin in such low entropy? The arrow of time paradox reminds us that while math allows time to flow both ways, reality doesn't. We live on a one-way street with no U-turns, and no one knows why. Imagine you sit in a chair with a quantum gun pointed at your head. The gun is connected to a quantum device that has a 50-50 chance of firing each time it's triggered. In one universe, the gun fires. In another, it doesn't. According to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, both outcomes happen, but you only experience the one where you survive. So from your perspective, you never die. That's the quantum immortality paradox. No matter how many times the gun is triggered, there's always a version of you who survives, and that version is the only one that experiences anything. Subjectively, you feel invincible. But here's the problem. This leads to absurd conclusions. Does that mean you'll live forever? that you'll survive car crashes, plane disasters, aging, just because a version of you always makes it. Most physicists don't believe this is a practical path to immortality, but it reveals a paradox about consciousness and probability. If infinite versions of you exist, and you're always conscious in the one that survives, death becomes statistically invisible to you. It's disturbing. You can imagine a future where every version of you dies in pain, except one, and you're stuck inside that one forever. The quantum immortality paradox is a thought experiment, but it challenges our deepest beliefs about chance, identity, and whether death is even something we can subjectively experience. Suppose you're asked to define bachelor. You say, a bachelor is an unmarried man. That seems perfect, precise, accurate, and clear. But here's the problem: if the definition is truly informative, it should tell you something new. Yet if it's correct, it shouldn't say anything you didn't already know. That's the paradox of analysis. The paradox asks, how can a definition be both correct and useful? If the definition tells you something you already understand, it's redundant. But if it gives you new information, it might not be accurate. So any good definition ends up feeling either obvious or wrong. This paradox isn't just a word game. It strikes at the heart of philosophy and logic. It challenges the idea that we can make progress through analysis by breaking concepts down into clearer parts. The issue is that language is slippery. Words like justice, freedom, or knowledge resist clean definitions. Any attempt to define them either feels like a restatement or introduces problems. The paradox of analysis warns us, clarity comes at a cost. Trying to explain a concept might just turn it into something else, or explain it to people who already knew what it meant. A family sits together on a hot summer day. Someone says, let's drive to Abilene for dinner. No one really wants to go, but each person agrees because they think the others want to. They all pile into a hot car, drive for hours, eat mediocre food, and come back exhausted. Later, they realize no one actually wanted to go. Everyone just went along to avoid conflict. That's the Abilene Paradox, when a group makes a collective decision that no individual in the group actually supports. It's not about deception, it's about silence, politeness, and the fear of rocking the boat. People suppress their preferences because they assume others feel differently. The result: everyone ends up doing something nobody wanted. You see this in workplaces, relationships, politics. A team supports a bad idea because no one wants to be the first to object. A couple gets married because neither wants to admit doubts. A company sticks with a failing plan because it believes the group is committed, when really, everyone is waiting for someone else to speak up. The Abilene Paradox reveals the danger of false agreement. It's not peer pressure, it's imagined consensus. Everyone assumes they're the only one who disagrees, and so they stay quiet. The solution? Honest communication. Someone has to say, wait, do we actually want this? Because sometimes, the trip to Abilene is entirely avoidable. On a clear night, you can look up and see thousands of stars. Our galaxy has hundreds of billions of them, and many have planets. Statistically, some of those planets should support life. Some of that life should be intelligent, and if even one civilization developed space travel, they could have spread across the galaxy in a few million years, a blink in cosmic time. So where is everybody? That's the Fermi Paradox. Named after physicist Enrico Fermi, it highlights a disturbing silence. The universe should be teeming with alien civilizations, but we see no signs, no signals, no probes, no visits, nothing. There are countless theories. Maybe intelligent life is rare. Maybe civilizations destroy themselves. Maybe we're in a simulation, or maybe aliens are deliberately hiding. Some say we're early, the first spark of cosmic intelligence. Others suggest the universe is filled with life, but we're simply not noticing it. The paradox isn't just about aliens. It forces us to confront deep questions. Is intelligence common or a fluke? Are we doomed to self-destruction, or are we truly alone? The Fermi Paradox stares at the stars and listens for an answer, and so far hears only silence. Can an all-knowing being learn something new? If it can, it wasn't truly omniscient. If it can't, then there's something it can't do, which breaks the definition of omnipotence too. This is the Omniscience Paradox, a theological and logical challenge that tests the very definition of an all-knowing mind. Here's another version. If an omniscient being knows everything that will ever happen, can it change the future? If yes, then its prior knowledge was wrong. If no, then it's not omnipotent. These paradoxes pile up fast. Can God create a stone so heavy even he can't lift it? If yes, he's not all-powerful. If no, he's still not all-powerful. The Omniscience Paradox reveals the limits of language. Our definitions of all and everything start to collapse when applied absolutely. Infinity, certainty, and power don't mix well in logic. Philosophers and theologians have debated solutions for centuries, redefining omniscience, or claiming it works outside of time. But no answer is universally satisfying. The paradox doesn't disprove God. It shows that some ideas, when stretched to their extremes, become unstable. The more perfectly we define omniscience, the more contradictions it creates. Imagine you've invested months into a project. It's failing. Deep down, you know it. But instead of walking away, you double down, spend more time, more money, more energy. Why? Because you've already invested so much. That's the escalation of commitment paradox, also known as the sunk cost fallacy. The more we invest in something, the harder it becomes to let go, even when letting go is the right move. We see this everywhere. Gamblers lose money and keep betting. Governments continue failed wars. Businesses cling to doomed products. Relationships drag on past the point of happiness. Logically, past investment shouldn't affect future decisions. If something isn't working, walk away. But emotionally, walking away feels like admitting failure, wasting effort, pride, and hope. This paradox reveals how rational people make irrational decisions, not because they don't see the truth, but because they feel trapped by the past. The Escalation Paradox teaches a hard lesson. Cutting your losses isn't weakness, it's clarity, and sometimes the bravest move is to stop digging. Imagine a universe identical to ours, same laws of physics, same particles, same time, but flipped in the mirror. Left is right, right is left. Now imagine someone from that universe enters ours. They look normal, they move normally, but everything inside them, from their molecules to their heart, is mirrored. So here's the question, would we even notice? That's the mirror universe paradox. It challenges the symmetry of nature. Most physical laws are mirror invariant. They work the same when left and right are flipped, but not all. Some particle interactions in weak nuclear forces violate mirror symmetry. So if you truly mirrored a universe and someone crossed over, their biology might violate the laws of physics in ours, simply because they're built in reverse. But here's the deeper layer. If everything is flipped, including your instruments, your frame of reference also flips. So how do you define left or right objectively? Is there such a thing? This paradox asks whether symmetry is fundamental or if our perception of it is just a local habit. And if a mirrored version of you ever walked in, would you know they weren't from here, or would you just see yourself in reverse? In formal logic, if you allow a contradiction, you can prove anything, literally anything. If you accept that both are as true and are as not true, then you can logically prove that the moon is made of cheese or that 2 plus 2 equals 5. This is called the principle of explosion, because from a single contradiction, logic explodes into chaos. It sounds absurd, but here's the math. Assume A and not sin A, not A are both true. From that, you can construct any arbitrary conclusion B using formal deduction rules. It's airtight and terrifying. This paradox highlights why consistency is sacred in logic and mathematics. A single flaw in your system, one contradiction, and the whole structure collapses. That's why logical systems are designed to avoid contradictions at all costs. But this also leads to a strange tension. Some systems seem to allow paradoxes, like the liar paradox, and yet we still use them. So do we throw out the whole system, or redefine how we deal with contradictions? The principle of explosion is a warning. In logic, one hole isn't just a leak, it's a detonation. This statement is false. If it's true, then it's false. But if it's false, then it's true. You're stuck in a loop. That's the paradox of self-reference, and it breaks logic itself. It's more than a word game. Self-reference appears in mathematics, language, even computing. It's what makes Gödel's incompleteness theorem possible. He constructed a mathematical statement that says, this statement is unprovable, and it shattered the idea that math could ever be complete and consistent. In programming, self-reference creates recursion. In philosophy, it creates contradiction. Even the idea of truth starts to wobble when a sentence comments on itself. One solution is to ban self-reference, but we can't because it's everywhere. Dictionaries define words using other words. Laws refer to how laws are made. Your brain reflects on itself. The paradox of self-reference reveals a limit in all systems that try to explain themselves. It's like trying to lift yourself by your own shoelaces. At some point, the loop breaks the logic. And yet, that loop is how we think. It's how we know we're thinking. So the paradox isn't just a problem, it's a mirror. Here's the claim: all truths are knowable. Seems reasonable, right? But from that idea alone, you can logically prove something far more extreme, that all truths are already known. This is Fitch's paradox of knowability. It shows that if every truth can, in principle, be known, then it logically follows that every truth must already be known, which is obviously false. We don't know everything. So either the logic is broken, or the original assumption is wrong. Let's break it down. Assume there's a truth that no one knows, a hidden fact. If all truths are knowable, this unknown truth could be discovered. But if it could be discovered, then it's not truly unknown. When formalized in logic, this creates a contradiction. Either the truth is known, or knowability implies omniscience. The paradox exposes a flaw in how we treat potential knowledge versus actual knowledge. It's not about science, it's about logic. And it tells us, even statements that sound harmless can collapse when taken to their logical conclusion. Fitch's paradox warns us that possibly knowable doesn't mean eventually known. And trying to treat those two ideas as the same can make logic eat itself. You have a heap of sand, you remove one grain. Is it still a heap? Probably yes. Remove another, still a heap. Keep going, at what point does it stop being a heap? That's the Sorites paradox, also called the bald man paradox. If a man loses one hair, he's not bald. Lose another, still not bald. But eventually, he's bald. So when did the change happen? This paradox shows how vague concepts break down when pushed to the edges. Words like heap, bald, tall, rich, or young have no precise boundary, but we act like they do. We draw sharp lines around blurry ideas. The Sorites paradox isn't about hair or sand, it's about language. It reveals that many of our concepts rely on fuzzy borders we pretend are clear. In daily life, we manage fine, but in logic and philosophy, this causes serious trouble. Some solutions involve fuzzy logic, assigning degrees instead of absolutes. Others say we should avoid vague terms entirely in formal reasoning, but neither answer feels fully satisfying. Because life is vague, we live in the gray, and sometimes one grain does make a difference, even when logic says it shouldn't. In a large election, your single vote almost never decides the outcome. The chance that your vote is decisive, that it breaks a tie, is astronomically small. So logically, why vote? That's the paradox of voting, or the Downs paradox. If everyone acts rationally and self-interestedly, they shouldn't bother voting. It's not worth the time or effort. Yet if everyone followed that logic, democracy would collapse. The paradox challenges the foundation of democratic participation. We're told every vote counts, but from a statistical viewpoint, almost none do. So why do people vote? Some say it's habit. Some say it's a moral duty. Others say people vote to feel part of something larger, a social ritual. But here's the twist: even if your vote won't change the outcome, voting itself does. When millions of people choose to act, the system survives. The paradox is that an irrational act, voting despite negligible impact, is what keeps the whole rational system alive. The paradox of voting shows how human behavior defies pure logic, and how that defiance might be the reason anything works at all. Tristram Shandy is writing his autobiography, but he's so detailed, he takes an entire year to write about a single day of his life. That means for every passing day, he falls a year further behind. You'd think he could never finish. But now imagine he lives forever. Here's the paradox. If he's immortal, then he has infinite time to finish writing. And even though he's always falling further behind, since one day takes a year, he also has a year to write about every day forever. So does he finish? This is the paradox of Tristram Shandy, created by philosopher Bertrand Russell. It's about infinity and how timelines overlap. It asks, can two infinities cancel each other out? In theory, yes, if the number of days lived and the number of years writing are both infinite and aligned one-to-one, he could match each life event with enough time to write about it. But emotionally, it still feels wrong. He's always lagging behind. The paradox reveals how our intuitions about infinity don't always match the math. Infinity isn't about being ahead or behind, it's about correspondence. And in that strange world, even the slowest writer might someday catch up. A law student named Euethlus promises to pay his teacher, Protagoras, after he wins his first court case. But after finishing law school, Euethlus doesn't take any cases, so Protagoras sues him for the fee. Here's the twist. If Protagoras wins the lawsuit, Euethlus must pay court's orders. If Euethlus wins, he's won his first case, and according to their deal, he must pay. Either way, Protagoras should get paid. But Euethlus argues the opposite. If he wins, he doesn't have to pay, court says so. If he loses, he still hasn't won a case, so by their contract, he owes nothing. So who's right? That's the paradox of the court. Both sides use the same logic to reach opposite conclusions. It's a legal loop, a contradiction built into the agreement itself. The paradox reveals what happens when legal promises rely on future conditions that can interact in circular ways. It also shows how clever reasoning can trap even the clearest deals in knots. There's no agreed solution. It depends on how you weigh contractual intent versus judicial outcome. But the paradox remains a favorite in law schools because it shows how words and logic can collide in the courtroom. Here's a sentence. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Write it again, slowly. This is the Quine Paradox, a self-referential sentence that refers to itself, not by saying this sentence, but by literally being the sentence it describes. It creates a loop without using direct reference. Named after philosopher W.V.O. Quine, the paradox messes with how language can twist around itself. It's not just this sentence is false. It's a step deeper, a sentence that describes its own behavior by demonstrating it. If you quote it, it becomes false. But to understand it, you have to quote it. The sentence traps you. The Quine Paradox shows that even without traditional self-reference, language can create loops. It plays with the edges of semantics, truth, and how we assign meaning. It also challenges how we define a sentence. Is it what it says, what it does, or how it interacts with itself? Philosophers and linguists study it not for answers, but for insight. Because once a sentence begins to describe itself without naming itself, logic becomes a maze. A teacher tells the class, there will be a surprise exam next week. It will happen on one day, but you won't know which day until it happens. The students think about this logically. They reason that the exam can't be on Friday because if it hasn't happened by Thursday, they'll expect it on Friday and it won't be a surprise. So they eliminate Friday. But then Thursday becomes the last possible day. So if it hasn't happened by Wednesday, they'll expect it on Thursday, and that ruins the surprise too. By this logic, they eliminate every day. So they conclude, the exam can't happen. But then on Wednesday, the teacher gives the test, and they're surprised. That's the surprise exam paradox. The students used correct logic to prove the exam couldn't happen, but it still did, and it still surprised them. So what went wrong? The paradox challenges the idea of surprise and how reasoning about the future affects the future. If you expect to be surprised, does that cancel the surprise? And if logic says the surprise is impossible, but it still surprises you, is the logic flawed or just the definition of surprise? It's a paradox of expectations, and ironically, the more you think about it, the harder it is to predict. Imagine you're part of a cloning experiment. You're put to sleep on Sunday. While asleep, scientists flip a coin. If it lands heads, they let you sleep through Monday and wake you on Tuesday. If it lands tails, they create a perfect clone of you, and both you and the clone are awakened on Monday, then both are put back to sleep and awakened again on Tuesday. You wake up, it's either Monday or Tuesday, but you don't know if you're the original or the clone. Now, what is the probability that the coin landed tails? This is the sleeping clone paradox, a variation on the sleeping beauty problem, but now with identity involved. The logic twists because on tails, there are two conscious observers on Monday, both thinking they might be the original. On heads, there's only one, and only on Tuesday. So from the perspective of a person waking up, the odds seem to shift. There are more waking moments in the tails scenario, which makes it feel more likely, even if the coin itself was a fair 50-50. The paradox blends probability, identity, and observer bias. If you do know which you are, how do you assign probability to what happened before you woke up? In quantum theory, this touches on observer effects and probabilities across many worlds. But even without physics, it forces you to ask, how much does your existence right now affect what must have happened in the past? In physics, information, the state of particles, is supposed to be conserved. Nothing is truly lost. If you know the starting state and all the rules, you can, in theory, reverse time and reconstruct everything. But black holes challenge that. When matter falls into a black hole, all its information, atoms, structure, quantum states, disappears into a singularity. Eventually, the black hole evaporates through Hawking radiation, releasing only random energy. The original information seems lost forever. But that breaks the rules of quantum mechanics. This is the black hole information paradox. Either our laws of physics are wrong, or black holes somehow don't destroy information. But if they don't, where does the information go? Some theories suggest it's stored on the event horizon, a holographic surface encoding everything inside. Others say it leaks out slowly in the radiation. Some propose wormholes or parallel realities. Stephen Hawking spent decades trying to resolve this paradox. It's still unsolved and touches the heart of physics. Does the universe forget, or is reality fundamentally reversible? The black hole information paradox is more than an astrophysical mystery. It's a question about memory, not human memory, but nature's. And right now, even the universe isn't answering. Imagine this: you make a decision and everything turns out perfectly. You're happy, successful, maybe even lucky. But deep down you feel something strange, regret. Not because you failed, but because the choice felt wrong at the time. Maybe it was based on impulse, poor reasoning, or even a lie, but it still worked. Should you regret it? That's the good regret paradox. It asks, can you rationally regret a choice that led to the best possible outcome? Should regret be about process or results? In ethics and decision theory, we often say good decisions are judged by the quality of reasoning, not outcomes. But in real life, results dominate. If your gamble wins, you're praised, even if it was reckless. So the paradox sits in that uncomfortable space. When outcomes are good, but the reasoning was bad, do you celebrate or feel guilty? It's common in medicine, business, and personal life. A doctor guesses a diagnosis and gets it right, but the guess was wrong in process. A person lies to protect someone, and that lie saves them. So, was it a good action? The paradox reveals a fracture between ethics and luck, and it asks a deeper question: is regret a tool for learning or punishment for thinking wrong, even when you won? Here's a card with a sentence on each side. Front, the sentence on the back of this card is true. Back, the sentence on the front of this card is false. Now, which side is right? This is the card paradox. At first it seems playful, but the loop it creates is logically toxic. If the front is true, then the back must be true, but the back says the front is false. That's a contradiction. If the front is false, then the back is false, meaning the front isn't false, so it must be true. That's a contradiction again. It's a cousin of the liar paradox, but this time built across two statements, each referring to the other. It's like two mirrors facing each other, endless reflection, but no stable ground. The card paradox shows how self-reference doesn't need to come from a single sentence. It can emerge from loops, cross-references, or systems that define each other. And it also reveals something unsettling about language. If we allow complete self-reference without rules, we create logical black holes, statements that eat themselves. Some logical systems ban this. Others create hierarchies to separate levels of language, what can and can't refer to what. But the card paradox proves, even paper can trap you in infinite logic. Imagine you step into a machine that creates a perfect copy of you, molecule for molecule, memory for memory, identity for identity. When you come out, there are now two of you. Here's the question: which one is you? This is the duplicator's paradox. It challenges the idea of personal identity. If your consciousness, memories, and body are all copied exactly, does the copy have the same you? And if it does, are you both the same person? Let's go further. Suppose the original is destroyed in the process. The copy continues your life seamlessly. Is that death or survival? Science fiction loves this paradox. Think of teleportation that breaks you down and rebuilds you elsewhere, or mind uploading that transfers you into a digital world. If a copy of you thinks it's you, is that enough? Philosophically, this touches on continuity. Is your identity just memory and structure, or something more, like a soul or physical continuity? Some say the moment there's a copy, identity splits. Others argue only one version can be you, and the rest are illusions. The duplicator's paradox isn't just a sci-fi puzzle. It's a mirror to your sense of self, and it quietly asks, what exactly are you made of? You've heard of the placebo effect, when a harmless pill makes you feel better simply because you believe it will. But there's a darker twin, the nocebo effect. That's when a harmless treatment causes negative effects because you expect them. Here's the paradox: your mind can harm your body even when the threat isn't real. In clinical studies, patients given sugar pills sometimes report headaches, nausea, or pain purely due to suggestion. They're told to expect side effects, and their brains make them real. The paradox deepens when you try to study or prevent it. If doctors tell you a treatment is safe, you're reassured, but they may be withholding information. If they tell you all the possible side effects, you might develop them just because you heard about them. So how do we inform without harming? The Nocebo Paradox sits at the crossroads of ethics, medicine, and psychology. It shows that belief can cause real suffering, and sometimes telling the truth makes things worse. It challenges the assumption that knowledge always helps, and it shows that the most powerful drug or poison might be in your own mind. Suppose you hear a simple sentence: if it rains, the ground will be wet. It rains, so you infer the ground is wet. Now imagine another case. You know that if someone broke the window, the alarm would go off. You hear the alarm. Do you infer the window was broken? This is where the inference paradox appears, especially in AI, law, or reasoning under uncertainty. The paradox arises when multiple causes can lead to the same result. Just because B follows A doesn't mean A caused B, but in daily life, our brains often jump to that conclusion. It's called affirming the consequent, and it's logically flawed but emotionally intuitive. In AI, this becomes a serious problem. Machines trained to infer patterns often reverse cause and effect. In law, it can send the wrong person to jail. In everyday life, it's why we blame people for outcomes they didn't control. The inference paradox reveals that the shape of logic isn't always the same as the feeling of logic. And in a world full of complex systems, our instinct to link events might be more dangerous than helpful. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time doesn't tick the same for everyone. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you compared to someone at rest. Here's the paradox: imagine two twins. One stays on Earth. The other boards a spaceship traveling near light speed. When the traveling twin returns, they've aged less than the one who stayed. This is the time dilation paradox, also known as the twin paradox. It seems contradictory. From the traveler's point of view, was Earth moving away and coming back? Shouldn't the other twin have aged less? But physics says no, because the traveling twin changes direction, experiences acceleration, and breaks the symmetry. The paradox isn't a flaw, it's a feature of reality. Time really does move slower at high speeds and in strong gravity. GPS satellites even correct for this daily. But emotionally, it's hard to accept. We think of time as fixed, the same for everyone. The paradox tells us that time is personal. Your seconds might not match mine, and when speed or gravity change, so does the clock. It's a paradox that isn't about confusion, it's about letting go of an ancient illusion that time is universal. It bends, it stretches, and it waits for no one. Time travel sounds exciting until you try to explain how anything in that loop exists. Imagine you build a time machine and go back in time. You meet your younger self, hand them a blueprint for the same time machine, and they use it to build one and then go back and do the same. Over and over, the machine design is passed down from future to past. But where did the blueprint come from in the first place? That's the core of the time travel ontology paradox. Ontology refers to the nature of being or existence, and in this case, something exists, the blueprint, without ever being created. It was never invented. It was just passed around in an infinite loop, so it exists without origin, violating every law of causality. It's similar to the Bootstrap Paradox, but this one focuses more on existence itself. A book, a formula, even a person, something that should require creation just seems to appear from nowhere, stuck in a causeless loop. The event causes itself, which breaks how we think about time. Think of the classic time travel story where a man travels back in time, meets a woman, and fathers a child. That child grows up to become the time traveler himself. Who are his parents? Himself. The loop is complete but deeply strange. No beginning, no end, no source. Or picture this, you find a mysterious violin in your attic. It's old, handmade, beautifully carved. One day you travel back in time and hand it to a young composer. He keeps it, plays it, and years later leaves it in the attic where you eventually find it. That means the violin has always existed in the loop, never made by anyone. It just exists. This paradox challenges more than logic. It challenges physics, ethics, and meaning. Because if objects or information can exist without origin, what else in your world might be looping? Are you sure your thoughts, ideas, or inventions didn't come from the future, disguised as memory? The paradox also plays with responsibility. If you didn't invent the thing, but only passed it along, are you still its creator? Is the loop itself the inventor? Philosophers have wrestled with this using terms like closed causal loops and ontological paradoxes. Some physicists, like Kip Thorne, have explored whether such loops could be self-consistent in a deterministic universe where no matter how bizarre the loop, it doesn't contradict itself. It's a loophole in causality that still obeys physics. But emotionally it disturbs us. We want beginnings. We expect that everything has a source. In our world, things start somewhere. Time has direction. Cause leads to effect. The time travel ontology paradox says, maybe not. Maybe some things never had a beginning. Maybe the blueprint, the violin, the traveler, or even you are part of a loop that no one started. And if that's true, what else has no origin? Imagine a baby looking in the mirror for the first time. At first, they don't recognize the reflection. But one day they do, they smile, they point, they begin to identify with the image. That moment is the mirror stage, a concept from psychoanalysis, famously developed by Jacques Lacan. But here's the paradox: the reflection isn't real. It's a flipped, surface version of the self, an illusion. And yet, the baby begins to build their identity on it. The paradox lies in this contradiction. You construct your idea of who you are based on something that is not you, a reversed image, an external projection. You internalize a false version of yourself, and that becomes your sense of I. It doesn't stop in infancy. Adults do this too. Every time you see yourself in a photo, hear your voice recorded, or imagine how others perceive you, you're interacting with a version of yourself that's both you and not you. And over time, this distorted image shapes how you act, think, and feel. The mirror stage paradox asks, how can your core identity be based on something outside of yourself? How can your sense of self depend on an image, a reflection, a symbol, something that's always slightly off? It's not just about mirrors. It's about the self as an illusion, a story you tell based on how others see you. Your reflection is never the full you. It can't show your thoughts, memories, fears, or inner world, but it's all you've got to go on when building a self-image. Now imagine two mirrors facing each other, infinite reflections of the same person, each slightly dimmer, each more distorted. That's what identity can become, layers of self-perception built on layers of illusion. Here's another twist. What happens when your reflection becomes better than you? Social media profiles, curated photos, exaggerated bios, all become mirrors of a self that doesn't fully exist. And yet we chase them, compare ourselves to them, and judge others by their reflections too. In psychology, this paradox explains feelings of fragmentation, that hollow sense that you don't fully know who you are. Because maybe you never did. You've only ever known the mirror. The mirror stage also ties into performative identity. We act differently in public, in private, on stage, online. Which one is the real you, or are you just a collage of reflections, none of which are complete? The paradox isn't meant to be solved, it's meant to be felt. To recognize that the image you've formed of yourself may be both necessary and false, that your I might be a shadow dancing on glass, that behind the mirror there might be no one. But you still get up each day, fix your hair, look in the mirror and say, that's me, even if it never truly was. You fire an arrow, it's flying through the air. Simple, right? Not to Zeno. Zeno of Elea was a Greek philosopher who loved to break reality with logic. One of his most famous paradoxes is the arrow paradox, and it goes like this. At any single instant of time, the arrow is frozen in place, not moving. Time is made of these instants. So, if the arrow is at rest at every individual instant, how can it ever be moving? It sounds absurd, but it's hard to refute. If time is just a collection of frozen slices, and in each one the arrow doesn't move, then when does the movement happen? Between instants. But if each instant is indivisible, then there's no between. Zeno's arrow paradox tries to prove that motion is impossible, or at least, that our understanding of it is flawed. In a sense, the paradox says that motion is an illusion, stitched together from still frames like a flipbook. Each frame shows the arrow still. Only the sequence creates the illusion of speed. Modern physics addresses this by redefining motion as a change in position over time, and calculus helps bridge the gap. We don't need to find the exact moment when the arrow moves, we define motion as happening across moments. But the paradox still haunts the way we think. It also raises deeper questions. Is time continuous or made of indivisible chunks? If it's a flow, how do we freeze it? If it's atomic, how does change happen between units? Zeno wasn't trying to stop arrows. He was trying to stop logic, to trap you in the gap between moments and show you that even the simplest things, like movement, break apart under deep analysis. In digital worlds where time and space are pixelated into frames and bits, Zeno's arrow feels even more real. Your screen is just a flickering sequence. Your video, your game, your perception, they're all Zeno's arrows. So next time you see something moving, ask yourself, is it really moving or just never quite still? You want to walk across the room. To do that, you have to walk halfway first. Before you get there, you need to walk half of that, and before that, half of that. According to Zeno's dichotomy paradox, you'll never get anywhere because there are infinite steps to take, each one cutting the distance in half. How can you complete an infinite number of steps in a finite amount of time? That's the paradox. The logic is clean. Every movement requires a smaller movement before it. If space is divisible forever, then motion becomes impossible. You'd be stuck forever just trying to get started. But in reality, we cross rooms all the time. So what's going on? The solution, at least in modern math, is that even though the steps are infinite, their total length adds up to a finite distance. It's called a converging series. 1, 2 plus 1, 4 plus 1, 8 plus 1, 16 never goes past 1. So yes, you take infinite steps, but the sum is still finite. In the real world, you can reach the wall. But the paradox doesn't really die. It still makes you question, what is space made of? If it's infinitely divisible, what does that mean for reality? And if you can divide motion into an endless number of cuts, what happens to the concept of speed? Physically, some theories suggest there's a smallest unit of space and time, the Planck length and Planck time. If that's true, maybe the universe isn't infinitely divisible. Maybe Zeno was wrong, or maybe he was right, but we've learned to ignore the cracks. The dichotomy paradox is more than an old thought experiment. It's a reminder that motion, which feels so natural, collapses under inspection. Every step you take hides an infinite ladder of steps you think you've skipped. But you didn't skip them, you added them together, and somehow infinity didn't stop you. Imagine a small town with a unique rule. There's exactly one barber, and this barber shaves all and only those men in town who do not shave themselves. Now the question, does the barber shave himself? If he does shave himself, he shouldn't, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then according to the rule, he must shave himself, since he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. This is the sleeping Barber Paradox, a variation on the classic Barber Paradox. It's simple to explain but logically destructive. No matter what the barber does, he violates the rule. The paradox reveals a self-referential contradiction, a logical loop that destroys itself. In reality, such a barber can't exist. The rule is flawed at its core. It tries to apply a condition to a set that includes the rulemaker. It's like saying this sentence is false. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. Now imagine you're designing a computer program. You give it a rule that applies to everything except itself. At some point, it might crash, stuck in a loop, unsure if it should apply the rule to itself. This is exactly the kind of problem early mathematicians and logicians ran into when trying to formalize logic and language. Bertrand Russell used this paradox to challenge naive set theory, the idea that for any property, there's a set of all things with that property. But the set of all sets that don't contain themselves leads to the same trap. Does it contain itself or not? This paradox isn't just theoretical. In programming, it's related to problems like deadlock and undefined behavior. In language, it's tied to self-reference and paradoxical statements. In ethics, it touches on authority, who watches the watchers. The sleeping Barber Paradox is small but sharp. It proves that even the simplest rules, if carelessly self-referential, can implode. Sometimes, the only solution is to step outside the system and change the rule. So the answer is, the barber doesn't exist, or if he does, he's very confused. You witness a crime on a busy street. A man is lying on the ground, clearly in need of help. People are walking by, some stop and look. No one helps, and neither do you. This is the Bystander Paradox. The more people are around, the less likely any one person is to help. Why? Because everyone assumes someone else will do it. It's not just a moral failing, it's a psychological trap. When responsibility is spread across a group, individual accountability disappears. You feel less pressure to act, even when the situation is urgent. And here's the paradox. If one person had been there, they'd probably have helped. But because everyone is there, no one acts. It was famously demonstrated in psychological experiments by Bibb Latané and John Darley in the 1960s. In one test, participants heard someone calling for help from another room. When they thought they were the only witness, they helped quickly. But when they believed others were also hearing the same thing, they were far less likely to respond. In real life, this paradox shows up during emergencies, public violence, or even online, when people ignore a cry for help in a crowded comment section. Everyone thinks, surely someone else will say something. It's an inversion of logic. We believe safety lies in numbers, but sometimes numbers paralyze us. The more people who could act, the less chance anyone will. The Bystander Paradox reveals something uncomfortable about morality. It's not enough to know what's right, you also need to believe it's your job to do it. And the moment you think someone else will, you've stepped into the paradox. To break it, someone has to go first. Point, act, speak, move. The moment you take responsibility, you release everyone else, you collapse the paradox. But most people wait, and that's why the paradox keeps happening. Not because no one cared, but because everyone thought someone else did. Imagine you're in a democracy where every vote counts equally, or so you think. You show up, cast your vote, and go home believing you've done your part. But statistically, your vote almost never decides anything. In a national election with millions of voters, the chance that your single vote changes the outcome is so small it's nearly zero. This is the voting power paradox. You're told your vote matters, but in practical terms, it almost never does. Still, if no one voted, the system would collapse. Your vote is both insignificant and essential at the same time. Here's how it breaks down. Let's say an election has 10 million voters. The odds that the final tally is exactly tied and your vote breaks the tie are astronomically low, something like 1 in tens of millions. That's the logical side. But socially and structurally, your vote carries symbolic weight. It's part of a collective decision, a shared ritual. The paradox lies in this contradiction. Each individual vote is meaningless in effect, but voting as a group is what makes democracy work. So every meaningless vote adds up to something meaningful. Another layer appears when we look at voter turnout. If more people believe their vote doesn't matter, fewer show up. But that makes each remaining vote more powerful, and suddenly, small groups can swing elections. The paradox flips. Not voting because it doesn't matter makes your vote matter even more to those who do show up. Then there's the problem of tactical voting. You may want to vote for your favorite candidate, but choose a more popular one to block someone you dislike. That decision, voting against instead of for, reduces sincerity, making the system more about strategy than representation. In systems like first past the post, voting can actually backfire. Supporting a third party might split the vote and hand victory to your least favorite option. So even though you're told to vote your conscience, the mechanics of the system punish honesty. This paradox has led to deep debates about alternative voting systems, ranked choice, proportional representation, and even sortition, choosing representatives randomly. Each of these tries to restore meaning to the individual vote while avoiding its statistical emptiness. But the core paradox remains. Your vote probably doesn't matter in a direct sense, but without it, nothing matters. Every large-scale democracy is a machine that runs on individually insignificant acts, and that's exactly why it's fragile. In the end, you don't vote because it matters. You vote because it only matters if everyone does. You have a single grain of sand, that's not a pile. You add another, still not a pile. Add a third, still not. But at some point, maybe after 100, 1,000, you've got a pile of sand. So where exactly did it become a pile? This is the paradox of the pile, or the Sorites paradox in its purest form. It's an ancient problem of vagueness. The word pile doesn't have a strict definition, but we act like it does. Here's the twist: if one grain of sand doesn't make a pile, and adding one grain never makes the difference, then by that logic, no amount of sand ever becomes a pile. That's absurd. Clearly, 1,000,000 grains make a pile, but then we're forced to ask, when exactly did it cross the line? Where's the threshold? This isn't just about sand, it's about categories. At what point does a person go from young to old, from tall to short, from rich to poor? These words have no fixed edge, but we use them as if they do. And it gets more complicated. Imagine you remove grains one by one from a pile. When does it stop being a pile? You'll feel the tension grow, you know it's still a pile, then suddenly it's not, but you can't name the exact point it changed. The paradox shows the limitations of language and logic when dealing with continuous change. In math, we like precise thresholds, but in real life, most things are fuzzy. The world doesn't always give us clear borders. This has real consequences. In law, when does someone become disabled? In ethics, how many lies make a person a liar? In politics, when does a protest become a riot? Philosophers have tried to solve the Sorites paradox in different ways. Some deny that vague terms can be used logically at all. Others propose supervaluationism, a way to say something is sort of true or indeterminate. Still others embrace fuzzy logic, where truth comes in degrees, not binaries. But even with those tools, the discomfort stays. The pile paradox forces you to admit that the way you cut up the world into categories, labels, names, is always a little artificial. There's no single grain that makes a pile, yet somehow you still believe in piles. And maybe that's the real paradox. You live in a world of soft boundaries, but think with sharp ones. You might think infinity is just really big. But in reality, there are different sizes of infinity, and that's what makes the paradox of infinity so strange. This paradox begins with Georg Cantor, a mathematician who discovered that some infinite sets are bigger than others. It sounds impossible. Infinite should mean endless. How can one endless be larger than another? Let's start simple. Count the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's an infinite set. Now add 0 and negative numbers, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, that's also infinite. But you can pair each positive number with a negative, 1 with -1, 2 with -2, so both sets are equally infinite. Now take all fractions, like 1, 2, 3, 7, 22, 13. That seems like more numbers, but you can still pair each one to a natural number using a clever system. So again, the same size infinity. But here's where things break. What about real numbers, all the decimals between 0 and 1? That's where Cantor's diagonal argument comes in. He proved that you can't list all the real numbers between 0 and 1 in any complete way, no matter how hard you try. Here's how. Suppose you try to list every real number between 0 and 1. You line them up like this: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 0, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9. Then Cantor says, watch this. He builds a new number by taking the first digit from the first number, the second digit from the second number, the third digit from the third number, and so on, and then changing each digit. The result is a new number that's guaranteed not to be on the list. So even though you tried to list all the real numbers, Cantor just created one that wasn't there, which means the list was incomplete. No matter what you do, you'll always miss some. Therefore, there are more real numbers than natural numbers. Both are infinite, but one is a larger infinity. This shattered the idea that infinity is one thing. It's not. There are hierarchies of infinity. Some infinite sets are bigger than others, and that throws everything we think we know about size, quantity, and logic into chaos. It also has deep implications for math, physics, and even the structure of reality. If space and time are continuous, that might mean they involve uncountable infinities, infinities you can't list, predict, or fully grasp. So the paradox is this: infinity doesn't just go on forever, it splits, stretches, and multiplies. and once you think you understand it, it slips out from under you, bigger, deeper, and stranger than before. Imagine you're told that the average human has one testicle and one ovary. Technically, it might be true, average the biology across all people, and that's what you get. But of course, no one actually has that anatomy. This is the error of the average paradox when statistics describe nobody. It shows up everywhere. The average American has less than 2 legs because some people lose one, but you'll never meet someone with 1.9 legs. The average family has 2.3 children, but no one has a third of a child. So what does average really mean? We often mistake averages for reality, but in many cases, the average is a mathematical ghost, a number that exists on paper, not in people. The paradox gets deeper in situations like income. Let's say the average income in a country is $70,000. That sounds comfortable until you learn that most people make far less, and a few billionaires push the number up. In that case, the mean average tells you almost nothing about what's normal. That's why we use medians, modes, and distributions, but in everyday language, we still cling to the average as if it reflects reality. It often doesn't. In some cases, designing for the average can lead to failure. In the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force built cockpits based on the average pilot, average height, arm length, shoulder width, but pilots kept crashing. Why? Because almost no one matched all the average measurements. The solution was to build adjustable cockpits, embracing variation instead of chasing a fictional norm. This paradox is everywhere. In education, teachers aim lessons at the average student, but there is no average student, just a classroom full of individuals. In medicine, dosages are designed for the average adult, ignoring the diversity of bodies, metabolisms, and genetics. The paradox is that the average can be accurate and misleading at the same time. It gives us a sense of the whole while hiding the parts. It feels scientific, but often ignores real complexity. So next time you hear an average, pause. Ask, is this number describing reality or erasing it? Because sometimes the person who fits the average best doesn't exist at all. You walk into a crowded room. Everyone's clapping at something you don't understand. You look around, confused, and think, maybe I missed something. So you start clapping too. Now someone else walks in, they see you clapping, assume you understand, and they join in. Before long, the whole room believes everyone else knows why they're clapping, but no one actually does. This is the paradox of public belief, a situation where a belief or behavior is sustained only because everyone thinks everyone else believes it, even if no one personally does. It's rooted in a concept called pluralistic ignorance, where individuals privately reject a belief but go along with it because they think others accept it. The paradox is that the group's behavior appears unified, even though almost no one internally agrees. One of the most famous examples happened during the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. For years, citizens were told the system worked. Privately, many doubted it, but because they thought everyone else supported it, they didn't speak up. Only when people realized others shared their doubts did the illusion collapse, almost overnight. This paradox shows up in everyday life too. In classrooms, students often stay silent about confusing material, assuming others understand. But when one person asks a question, others nod in relief. No one understood, but everyone thought everyone else did. In fashion, trends persist not because everyone likes them, but because no one wants to be the first to say they don't. The same goes for certain workplace rules, religious practices, even political opinions. The group believes in something it doesn't actually believe in, and that belief survives through mutual illusion. This creates a feedback loop. People act based on what they think others think, not on their own values. And since everyone is doing the same, the illusion grows stronger. To break the paradox, someone has to go first, speak up, opt out, question the script. The moment one person reveals their private belief, others often follow. The group's apparent consensus shatters and the real diversity of thought emerges. But that's scary because going first risks rejection. What if you are the only one who doubts? So the paradox traps people, everyone waiting for someone else to be honest while pretending to agree. The paradox of public belief reminds us how fragile consensus can be. Sometimes, the loudest truths are made of silence, and the biggest lies are the ones everyone pretends to believe. Imagine you learn something not through direct experience, but because someone told you. You know your birth date, not because you remember being born, but because your parents said so. You know the Earth is round, not because you've seen it from space, but because experts told you. Most of what you know isn't personal, it's borrowed. This is the paradox of indirect knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the less of it is your own. You rely on others, observations, records, experiments, and memories, but those are all vulnerable to error, bias, or deception. You know Napoleon existed, but you've never met him. You trust books, museums, historians. You know atoms exist, but you've never seen one. You believe in molecules, galaxies, and bacteria, all invisible to your senses because someone else said they're there. So how certain can you be? If every layer of knowledge comes from someone else's claim, your belief structure is a house of mirrors, reflecting truths that may have no base. The paradox is that our understanding of the world grows more expansive and more fragile the more we rely on indirect sources. You might say, but science is repeatable. True, but you haven't repeated those experiments. You trust that others did and did so honestly. You believe in peer review, institutions, consensus, but those are social constructs, not infallible truths. This doesn't mean knowledge is worthless, but it does mean it's contingent. Contingent on memory, trust, language, translation, and time. History could be revised. Science can be overturned. What you think you know might one day be called wrong. The paradox grows sharper with modern life. The internet expands our knowledge base infinitely, but makes it harder to verify anything. You know a celebrity died or a country changed laws because a website said so, but the deeper you go, the more layers you find and the fewer you can touch directly. Even your memories aren't immune. You remember your first birthday party, but really, it's a photo someone explained to you. You remember family stories because they were repeated, not because they happened to you. So what is real knowledge? Only what you've directly experienced. But that's tiny, narrow, and subjective. Trusting others expands your world, but dilutes your certainty. The paradox of indirect knowledge forces you to confront the tension between truth and trust. You know more than ever, and yet, almost nothing is truly yours. 3 friends check into a hotel. The manager says the room costs $30. They each contribute $10 and pay the total. Later, the manager realizes there's a special deal. The room should only cost $25. He gives $5 to the bellboy and tells him to return it. The bellboy, not sure how to split $5 between 3 people, decides to give them $1 each and keeps $2 for himself. Now, each friend has paid $9, totaling $27, and the bellboy has kept $2, but 27 plus 2 equals 29. Where is the missing dollar? This is the paradox of the missing dollar, and it's a classic case of misdirection by arithmetic. It appears logical at first glance, but it plays on how we frame the math. Let's walk through it carefully. The friends originally paid $30. The hotel took $25 for the room. The bellboy kept $2. The guests got $3 back. That's 25 plus 2 plus 3 equals 30, the original total. So what's the problem? The issue lies in adding $27, what they paid, and $2, what the bellboy kept. That addition doesn't make sense. The $27 already includes the $2 the bellboy kept and the $25 the hotel received. You shouldn't add the $2 again. In truth, the $27 is made up of $25, room cost, $2, bellboy's tip, that adds up correctly. The remaining $3 was returned $1 to each friend, so where's the paradox? The paradox is psychological. It presents the wrong equation. It tricks your mind into asking the wrong question. Instead of subtracting the $2 the bellboy kept from the $27 paid, it adds it, creating an illusion of a missing dollar. This plays into how we think about money and totals. When dealing with shared costs and change, we tend to oversimplify the arithmetic. We expect the numbers to balance in the most obvious way, but real-life transactions often split and recombine money in ways that confuse our mental math. The deeper lesson is about how easy it is to manipulate logic using numbers. This isn't just a party trick. The same sleight of hand shows up in sales tricks, tax structures, and even public statistics. The numbers are technically correct, but framed to mislead. So the missing dollar never really went missing. It was just a distraction, a way to confuse your sense of where value goes. The paradox doesn't reveal a flaw in math, it reveals a flaw in how you process math. You're $100 into a movie. It's terrible, boring plot, bad acting, long runtime, but you say, I already paid, might as well finish it. so you stay. Now imagine it's not a movie but a war. A government has spent billions, lost lives, and made no progress, but they say, we can't stop now, we've sacrificed too much. So they continue. This is the escalation paradox, also known as the sunk cost fallacy taken to the extreme. The more you invest in something, time, money, effort, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when quitting would be rational. The paradox lies in the contradiction. Past losses should have no bearing on future decisions, but they do. Humans hate the idea of waste, so we keep investing, hoping to make it worth it. This behavior shows up in all areas of life. You stay in a bad relationship because we've been together for years. You keep a failing business afloat because we've already put so much in. You keep playing a losing hand, thinking one more card will change everything. In psychology and economics, this is irrational. Rational decision-making is forward-looking. You should only consider future outcomes, not past losses. But emotions don't work like spreadsheets. They drag the past into the present. Escalation becomes especially dangerous in systems with no clear end. Governments escalate wars. Companies escalate spending. People escalate arguments, not to win, but because they've already come so far they can't turn back. One famous example is the Vietnam War. Even when internal reports showed the war couldn't be won, leaders kept escalating. Why? Because admitting failure would mean admitting all previous sacrifice was pointless. This isn't limited to politics. Casinos use it. Slot machines are designed to make you feel like you're due for a win. You lose $200 and then you bet another $50 because if you leave now, you've lost for nothing. The paradox traps you in a cycle. Every bad outcome justifies the next investment, and the deeper you go, the harder it is to stop. The cost of quitting rises with each decision, even if the rational choice would have been to quit long ago. The only way out is to accept loss. That's emotionally hard, it feels like failure, but it's often the only way to break the spiral. The escalation paradox reveals a core tension in human nature. We want our investments to pay off, but sometimes they don't, and the more we try to fix the past, the worse the future becomes. You're trying to take a picture of someone acting naturally, but the moment they see your camera, they change their behavior, they pose, smile, or freeze. Suddenly, you're no longer capturing how they were, you're capturing how they reacted to being watched. This is the essence of the observer effect paradox. The act of observing changes the thing being observed. In science, this paradox is most famous in quantum mechanics. When scientists try to measure a particle's position, the measurement process itself disturbs the particle. In other words, you can't observe something without interfering with it. One example is the double-slit experiment. If you fire particles like electrons through two slits and no one observes them, they behave like waves, forming an interference pattern on the screen behind. But if you place a detector to observe which slit the electron goes through, the pattern disappears. The electrons now behave like particles, not waves. It's as if the particles change their behavior simply because they're being watched. Outside of physics, the paradox shows up in psychology, economics, and everyday life. When people know they're being studied, they often behave differently. This is known as the Hawthorne effect, named after a factory study where worker productivity increased simply because the workers knew they were being observed. Teachers who know they're being evaluated teach differently. Employees who know their internet usage is tracked browse more carefully. Even animals in the wild act differently if they sense humans nearby. The paradox challenges the idea of objective measurement. If observing a system changes it, then you can never fully understand that system as it naturally is. You only see it as it is under observation. This leads to philosophical questions. Can you ever know something without altering it? Is it possible to study the world without affecting it? Even in social situations, we see the paradox. You act differently when alone than when someone is watching, and when you know you're being recorded on camera, on social media, your behavior shifts again. The observer effect paradox shows that knowledge comes at a price. To observe is to intrude, and sometimes the very act of trying to know the truth destroys the truth you were trying to find. Imagine a staircase that rises in a square. Each step climbs upward, and after 4 turns you arrive back where you started, but higher than before. You keep climbing and climbing, yet never get anywhere. It's a loop, but it looks perfectly logical. This is the Penrose staircase, also called the impossible staircase, created by Lionel and Roger Penrose and later made famous by M.C. Escher in his artwork Ascending and Descending. The paradox is visual. It appears to be a functioning staircase, obeying the rules of geometry, gravity, and perspective, but logically, it's impossible. You can't go up forever in a loop and return to the same height. That would violate the laws of space. But your brain doesn't immediately notice the trick. Your visual system accepts the illusion because each segment looks locally correct. Step by step, it makes sense. It's only when you look at the whole loop that the contradiction appears. This paradox reveals a core flaw in human perception. We trust what we see, even when it's wrong. The Penrose staircase is internally consistent but globally impossible, a kind of visual lie that feels real. It's not just an art trick. Similar illusions appear in real life, especially in engineering, architecture, and software. When local rules seem fine, but the system as a whole breaks down, you may be inside a real-world Penrose paradox. It also appears in feedback loops, where systems seem to move forward or improve, but always cycle back. Political debates, social progress, even personal habits can sometimes feel like an impossible staircase, moving forward in steps but never escaping the loop. There's also an emotional version of this paradox. You work hard, improve, grow, change, and still feel like you're in the same place. Each step feels like progress, but the loop resets. You climb forever, only to return to where you began. The Penrose staircase reminds us that perception can be deceiving. Just because something looks consistent doesn't mean it's possible, and just because we're moving doesn't mean we're going anywhere. Imagine you write a sentence that says, "This sentence cannot be proven to be true." Now stop and think. If the sentence is true, then what it says is accurate. It cannot be proven true. That makes it a true statement that cannot be proven. But if it's false, then it can be proven, meaning it's actually true. You're caught in a loop. This is similar to the famous Gödel sentence, which lies at the heart of the Gödel incompleteness theorems, discovered by mathematician Kurt Gödel in 1931. What Gödel proved is this. In any consistent formal system complex enough to contain arithmetic, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. In simple terms, truth is bigger than proof. Gödel's sentence is a mathematical construction. It essentially says, this statement is not provable within this system. If the system is consistent, then the sentence is true but unprovable, and if the system could prove the sentence, it would be inconsistent because it would have proven something false. So the paradox is this: in trying to capture all truths with logic and axioms, you will always leave some truths out. The more complete your system, the more it risks breaking its own logic. The more consistent it tries to be, the less it can actually say. This shattered the dream of early 20th century mathematicians like Hilbert, who hoped to find a complete and consistent set of axioms that could prove all mathematical truths. Gödel proved that such a system cannot exist. The Gödel sentence is not a bug, it's a feature. It shows the limits of formal reasoning, that no matter how perfect a logic system you build, there will always be statements just outside its reach, and those statements are still true. It's a mind-bending idea that truth and provability are not the same. You can know something is true, but never be able to prove it from the inside. It's like standing inside a box, knowing there's something on the outside, but having no way to reach it. In philosophy, Gödel's result has been compared to self-awareness and consciousness. Just like a system can't fully explain itself, maybe we can't fully understand our own minds. There are always blind spots, always statements we can't resolve from within our frame. The paradox also inspires questions in artificial intelligence, religion, and even ethics. Can a machine ever fully understand itself? Can a belief system prove all of its own principles? Can logic define its own limits without breaking them? Gödel's sentence is a quiet mathematical riddle, but it tells us something profound. That certainty has boundaries, and that truth will always be, in some sense, bigger than understanding. You're looking at a black and white image. In the center, it's shaped like a vase. But if you shift your focus, suddenly you're no longer seeing a vase, you're seeing two faces in profile facing each other. Then, without trying, it flips again. Vase, faces, vase, faces. This is the Face-Vase Paradox, a classic visual illusion that exposes something surprising about perception. You can see one version or the other, but never both at the same time. Your brain is not just passively recording what's in front of you, it's interpreting the data. It makes a decision, this is a vase, or these are faces, but it can't do both simultaneously. And the strange part, the image never changes, only your perception does. This paradox reveals the idea of perceptual bistability, where a single, unchanging stimulus produces two mutually exclusive interpretations. Your brain flips between them, not because one is right and one is wrong, but because it can't hold both at once. There are other examples: the Necker cube, a wireframe cube that flips orientation in your mind; the spinning dancer who seems to twirl clockwise, then suddenly counterclockwise. Your eyes stay still, your mind changes. Why does this matter? Because it shows that perception is not objective. Even something as basic as seeing is influenced by mental filters, context, and unconscious decisions. The world is ambiguous, and your brain resolves that ambiguity by choosing a version of reality. The Face-Vase Paradox also points to a limitation. Sometimes you can't see the full picture, not because of blindness, but because of conflicting frames. When two interpretations are in tension, the brain picks one, and it becomes very hard to hold both at once. This has analogies in psychology and social life. Think of people you love and hate at the same time. Think of situations that are both beautiful and tragic. Think of moral dilemmas that have two valid sides. Your brain wants to pick, but reality isn't always so clear. In this way, the Face-Vase Paradox is more than a clever image. It's a symbol of cognitive limitation, that we are constantly switching between simplified stories, missing the layered truth behind them. And just like in the image, truth often lives not in one interpretation, but in the tension between them. Imagine you've lost your left arm. You suffer from something called phantom limb pain, a sensation that your missing arm still hurts, even though it's no longer there. One day, a doctor places a mirror in a box so that your right arm's reflection appears where your left arm used to be. You move your right arm, and in the mirror, it looks like your left arm is moving too. Your brain sees motion where the pain was, and suddenly, the pain disappears. That's real, it's called a mirror box, and it works. But it creates a disturbing question. If the brain can be tricked into relieving pain in a missing limb by seeing a mirror image, then what is pain really? What is the self really? This is the mirror box paradox, a phenomenon where visual input overrides physical reality, tricking the mind into believing something is true that logically can't be. The arm is gone, yet the brain feels it based on a visual illusion. And here's the real kicker. It doesn't just remove pain. In some cases, the illusion can even create pain. If the mirrored arm is held in an uncomfortable position, the person might feel discomfort in the non-existent limb. So now we're left with an unsettling realization. The body map in your brain isn't always connected to physical truth. You can feel a limb that doesn't exist. You can move a body part that's not there. And your brain can resolve or even generate suffering based on what it sees, not what is. But this paradox isn't limited to amputees. Virtual reality taps into the same glitch. When you control a fake body in VR and it moves as you move, you begin to feel like it's your body. Some people even recoil when the avatar gets hurt, despite knowing it's not real. Your brain adopts what it sees. This is what makes the mirror box paradox so disturbing. It suggests that identity, sensation, and pain are all tied to perception, not reality. You don't need a body part for it to hurt. You don't need truth for it to feel true. The brain can substitute input and the body obeys. And it gets deeper. Phantom limb pain can persist for years, but the moment the mirror illusion works, it stops, as if the brain was just waiting for a new story to believe. So the paradox becomes clear. If your sense of self, pain, and control can all be edited by a mirror, then what is the real you? Is it the body or the illusion your brain believes in? And if illusions can heal or hurt, does that make them more powerful than truth? The mirror box paradox isn't just medical, it's existential. It tells you that your brain doesn't need facts, it needs coherence. And sometimes, a lie is enough to fix the truth. You're at a royal banquet. A king receives two identical cups of wine. One is poisoned, one is safe. A prisoner is told, you may choose which one the king drinks, but if the king dies, you'll be executed. If he lives, you go free. The prisoner has no information, no way to detect the poison, no reasoning to rely on, it's pure chance. But then a voice says, choose carefully, your life depends on it. This is the paradox of the poisoned wine. You are responsible for a decision, even though you have no control over its outcome. This isn't just fantasy, it's a metaphor for real-life decisions made under complete uncertainty, where the consequences are huge but knowledge is zero. You're forced to choose, and yet no amount of intelligence or logic can improve your odds. In game theory, this is called a zero-information game. You have no data, no strategy, no feedback. Your only tool is luck, but you are still blamed for the result. This creates a psychological and ethical paradox. If the outcome is random, why should the chooser be rewarded or punished? If a doctor chooses between two treatments with no evidence and one works, they're praised. If it fails, they're blamed. But in both cases, the decision quality was the same, uninformed. The paradox also appears in moral philosophy. Suppose two drivers both text while driving. One hits a pedestrian, the other doesn't. We punish the first, even though the moral failing, texting while driving, was the same. Why? Because outcome drives judgment, not just intention. That's the poisoned wine, same choice, different result, and one life is destroyed, the other spared. There's also a version of this paradox in leadership. A general makes a risky move. If it wins the war, he's a hero. If it fails, he's a fool. But the choice might have been exactly the same in both timelines, just different dice rolls. So what does this tell us? It exposes a flaw in how we think about responsibility and fairness. We judge people based on results, even when those results were outside their control. We expect perfect outcomes from imperfect information. The paradox of the poisoned wine forces us to ask, should you be punished for being unlucky? And if not, then how do we judge anyone's decisions when the future is unknowable? It's easy to say people are responsible for their choices, but sometimes choices are made in darkness with no reason, no guidance, no way out, and yet someone always drinks the wine. Imagine waking up one day and realizing you've been dreaming your entire life. Everything, your family, your memories, even your thoughts, were just parts of a long, continuous dream. But here's the twist. What if this new reality you woke up into is just another layer of the dream? This is the paradox of the sleeping world, the idea that you can never truly know whether you're awake or asleep, because every level of reality can perfectly simulate all the signs of waking life. The dream feels real. The pain, the conversations, the logic, all of it feels grounded, and so does the world you're in right now. You say, but I know I'm awake. But have you ever had a dream where you thought the same thing, where everything made perfect sense until it did? Have you ever woken up and realized your dream had rules, structure, and even time? The paradox starts with a simple question. How can you prove that you're not dreaming right now? Any test you propose, reading a clock, touching a wall, feeling your breath, can all happen in dreams. Lucid dreamers often control these things with full awareness. So if your senses can deceive you in dreams and you trust those same senses now, what makes this moment different? The philosopher Descartes posed this problem centuries ago. He asked, what if an evil demon deceives me about everything I experience? His solution was famous, I think, therefore I am. But even that assumes your thinking self is real and not just part of the dream. Modern neuroscience hasn't helped much. Scientists know that the brain processes reality and dreams through the same machinery. The difference is only in how input is managed. In deep sleep, your brain creates its own reality. But how do you know it isn't doing the same thing now? This paradox gets more haunting when you consider cases of dream within a dream, where people wake up inside a dream only to wake up again. It makes reality feel less like a solid ground and more like a stack of masks. Movies like Inception and The Matrix exploit this idea, realities inside realities, where every wake-up may be just another trap. But even without fiction, people have experienced false awakenings, waking up, going about their day, only to suddenly jolt awake in bed, realizing the entire day was a dream. So what's the cost of this paradox? It erodes the certainty of reality. It plants doubt in the very ground we stand on, and it reveals that our sense of being awake is not proof of anything, only a feeling that has been wrong before. The sleeping world paradox isn't about being stuck in a literal dream. It's about the fragility of assumed certainty, that what you call reality might just be the most convincing dream you've ever had. Let's say you're offered a choice. You can experience a year of pure happiness, travel, love, discovery, but at the end of it, your memory will be wiped completely. You'll forget everything. To you, it will never have happened. Would you take the deal? This is the memory erasure paradox, the clash between experience and memory. If something brings you joy but leaves no trace in your mind, was it worth it? And more strangely, did it even happen for you? Let's reverse it. Suppose you have a memory of an amazing trip, but that trip never really happened. It was implanted, false, synthetic. You remember joy, adventure, deep meaning. But in truth, none of it occurred. Which is more real, the fake memory or the real absence? This paradox forces you to confront what it means for something to matter. Do events have value only if you remember them, or is their reality independent of your memory? Philosopher Robert Nozick proposed the experience machine, a device that can simulate perfect happiness, adventure, or success. But once inside, you won't remember entering it. You'll think the fake world is real. Would you plug in? If yes, you value pleasure and experience, even fake ones. If no, you value reality, even if it's harder. The memory erasure paradox sits at the heart of this tension. It's why we fear Alzheimer's, not just because of confusion, but because of the loss of self. If your memories disappear, do you disappear too? Are you still the same person if you can't remember your love, your pain, your past? Memory seems to anchor identity, but it also traps us. Traumatic memories can define people's lives, shaping how they behave, think, or love. So some people might ask for selective memory erasure to remove grief, addiction, or fear. But then the question arises, if you erase what hurt you, do you erase part of who you are? The paradox deepens in ethics. If someone commits a crime and forgets it completely, due to amnesia, are they still guilty? Can you punish someone who has no memory of doing harm? Even in relationships, the paradox plays out. If someone cheats on you but you never find out and your life remains happy, is it better not to know? Does knowledge make it worse? Is the memory the crime or the act? The memory erasure paradox doesn't just question what we remember. It questions whether memory is reality or just a reflection. It asks whether joy without memory is still joy, whether pain erased is truly gone, whether forgetting makes something disappear or just hides it deeper. And ultimately, it asks, are we made of our experiences or only the ones we remember? Stand between two mirrors facing each other. Now look into one. What do you see? A tunnel of reflections, your image duplicated again and again, shrinking into eternity. Each reflection contains the next, and the next contains another. There's no end, just repetition, just recursion. This is the paradox of the infinite mirror, a visual symbol for self-reference, infinity, and the limits of perception. You're looking at a copy of a copy of a copy, each one smaller and more distorted, but still somehow you. And yet, the reflection never quite reaches the end. It's infinite, but it takes up a finite space. This phenomenon feels trivial at first. It's just mirrors, right? But think about what it implies. You're seeing infinity without going anywhere, an endless sequence that lives inside a few centimeters of glass. Now apply that idea to thought. Imagine thinking about yourself thinking, then thinking about that, then about the thought of that thought. Where does it stop? The human mind, like the mirrors, can loop inward infinitely. This is self-reference, and it underpins countless paradoxes, from Gödel's sentence to the liar paradox to conscious reflection. The mirror paradox is used to illustrate this recursion, a system looking at itself endlessly. It appears in philosophy, mathematics, psychology, and even visual art. In computer science, it's the problem of a program that tries to analyze its own code. In language, it's a sentence referring to itself. In neuroscience, it's the brain trying to understand itself, a loop that may never reach resolution. But the mirror paradox isn't just intellectual, it also reveals a psychological trap. Have you ever obsessed over your identity, wondered how people see you, then wondered how you see yourself seeing you? This recursive self-awareness can create anxiety, an infinite feedback loop of perception. It's why we sometimes freeze on camera or feel strange hearing our own voice. We're caught between mirrors. And here's the twist, each reflection is still you, but also not you. It's smaller, warped, less real. It has no depth. It's a simulation, not a substance. The mirror doesn't give you yourself, it gives you a copy of a copy. So the paradox deepens. If you can see infinite versions of yourself and each one is slightly off, then which one is real? Where does the truth stop and the distortion begin? The mirror paradox challenges the idea of stable identity. If perception can be endlessly reflected, maybe the self isn't a solid core, but a series of echoes. Maybe you are just the current frame of reflection, with the rest fading into the distance. And what if you turn away from the mirror? Does the tunnel collapse, or does it still exist, invisible, infinite, behind you? The paradox of the infinite mirror isn't just about mirrors. It's about what happens when systems turn inward, when the observer becomes the observed. And whether we can ever find the first reflection, or if we're always chasing an image of ourselves that can never quite be caught. You buy a lottery ticket, the odds of winning are 1 in 100 million. Rationally, you believe you won't win. In fact, if asked, you'd say every single ticket yours, your neighbor's, a stranger's is almost certainly a loser. But one ticket will win, and someone has to be right. This is the paradox of the lottery ticket, the idea that it is rational to believe each ticket will lose, but also irrational to believe that all of them will lose. Think about it, for every ticket it makes perfect sense to say, this one probably won't win. But then, if you say that for all 100 million tickets, you've just concluded that no one will win, which contradicts the very rules of the lottery. So where's the error? The paradox arises from the tension between probability and collective certainty. Each belief is justified in isolation, but taken together, they form a contradiction. It's like saying, I have good reason to believe ticket 1 will lose, then ticket 2, then ticket 3, all the way to ticket 100 million. At the end, you've reasoned that none will win, but you know one must. So either your reasoning is flawed, or your confidence in each step is misplaced. This paradox shows up in philosophy as a challenge to rational belief. It asks, can you have a large set of rational beliefs that lead to an irrational conclusion? If yes, then rationality might not be consistent across scales. It also echoes the lottery problem in epistemology, where you're justified in believing each ticket will lose, but not justified in believing that all will lose. That may sound like a small difference, but it breaks logic in a fundamental way. Imagine applying this to real life. Suppose you're hiring someone, you have 100 applicants. For each one you say, they probably won't get the job, fair enough, but now you've convinced yourself none will, even though you're required to hire one. Your beliefs made sense individually, but failed collectively. Or take criminal justice. A prosecutor believes each piece of circumstantial evidence points to guilt, but taken together, the case might be full of holes. Or the reverse, each doubt seems small, but combined they make a strong case for innocence. The paradox lies in accumulation. The lottery ticket paradox forces us to ask, is belief about individuals valid when scaled to the group? If you're sure every single tile is gray, how do you explain a colorful mosaic? It also speaks to probability's slippery nature. Just because something is very unlikely doesn't mean it won't happen, and if everyone dismisses the rare event, no one is prepared when it occurs. So the next time you look at a lottery ticket and think, this can't win, remember, one ticket has two. And someone somewhere is wrong, even though they were right to believe they were. Imagine 2 lightning bolts strike a train track, one at the front, one at the back, at the exact same time. You're standing at the center of the train, watching both ends. If the train is stationary, the flashes of light reach you at the same moment. You conclude, the strikes happened simultaneously. Now imagine the train is moving forward. Suddenly, the flash from the front reaches you after the flash from the back. You're still at the center, but the motion changes the timing. You now conclude, the strikes did not happen at the same time. But here's the paradox, both observers are correct in their own frames. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, simultaneity is not absolute. Events that are simultaneous in one frame of reference may not be simultaneous in another. This is the Simultaneity Paradox, and it breaks one of our deepest assumptions, that events occur in a fixed order for everyone. We assume that if something happens now, it happens now for everyone, everywhere. But relativity says that's not how time works. Let's take it further. Suppose 2 people, Alice and Bob, are in different places, moving relative to each other. They both observe 2 explosions in space. Alice says they happened at the same time. Bob says one came before the other, and both are right from their own frames of reference. That seems impossible. How can time itself be different depending on where you are and how fast you're moving? The answer lies in the way space and time are woven together. In Einstein's universe, space and time are not separate, they form a single continuum called spacetime, and when you move through space, you affect how you experience time. This creates strange consequences. If simultaneity isn't absolute, then there's no universal now. What's happening right now on a distant star depends on who you ask and how they're moving. There is no single slice of the universe you can point to and say, this is the present moment everywhere. It also challenges our idea of causality. If different observers disagree on the order of events, how can we be sure what caused what? In some cases, cause and effect still hold firm, signals can't travel faster than light. But in others, especially in quantum physics, the boundaries blur. This paradox isn't just theoretical. It plays a role in GPS satellites, which have to account for time dilation and simultaneity differences due to their motion and gravity. Without Einstein's corrections, GPS would be off by kilometers. The Simultaneity Paradox teaches us a humbling truth, that time is not universal. Our clocks tick differently depending on motion and location, and what seems obvious, that two things happen together, may not be obvious at all. In a world without absolute simultaneity, the question, what time is it, becomes more than a convenience, it becomes a matter of perspective. Everything you know about the world, the taste of coffee, the color of the sky, the sound of your name, comes through your senses. But your senses are not direct windows to reality. They're translations. They convert external signals, light, sound, pressure, into electrical signals in your brain. This leads to the paradox of indirect experience, the unsettling realization that you have never experienced the world directly. You've only ever experienced your brain's interpretation of it. Think about it. You don't see objects, you see photons bouncing off them, hitting your eyes, being processed by neurons. You don't hear sounds. You detect vibrations in air, transformed into nerve impulses. You don't taste food. You process chemical signals interpreted as flavor. So how can you be sure that what you perceive is real? If a virtual reality headset perfectly stimulated your senses, could you tell the difference? If your brain were in a vat fed signals by a computer, would you know? This is the famous brain in a vat thought experiment, and it springs directly from this paradox. The deeper problem is this: if all of your knowledge about reality comes through interpretation, then reality itself is forever behind a wall. You can describe your experience, but never access the thing in itself. It's like trying to understand the ocean by looking at a painting of waves. The painting might be detailed, even beautiful, but it's not water, it's not salt, it's not depth. This paradox also touches on philosophy of mind. If we never experience the world directly, how do we know our experiences are accurate? What if your red is my green? What if your pain is my pressure? What if your world is an illusion that just happens to feel consistent? We assume the world is out there and our senses give us truth, but this paradox reminds us we only ever know what our brain tells us, and brains can be wrong. Hallucinations, illusions, and dreams are all examples of the brain simulating reality, sometimes perfectly, sometimes not. So how do we live with this? Some turn to science, using instruments to extend our senses. Telescopes, microscopes, particle detectors, but even those devices must still pass through the same interpreter, the human brain. We may see more, but we still see indirectly. Others accept that certainty is impossible and focus on coherence. If our experiences are consistent and useful, maybe that's enough. Maybe reality is less about truth and more about function. The paradox of indirect experience doesn't say the world is fake. It says you can't reach it directly. You are always one layer away, interpreting, translating, believing. Your experience is real, but it may not be what you think it is. And in that gap between perception and truth, between signal and interpretation, lies the strange, fragile space where we all live. Imagine this: 5 people walk into a room, one of them is a billionaire, the rest are middle-class workers. Suddenly, the average wealth in the room skyrockets into the hundreds of millions. But does that average tell the truth? Not really. This is the paradox of averages, when averages fail to represent reality. We often use averages to simplify. What's the average income, the average temperature, the average test score? But sometimes averages distort more than they reveal. They smooth out extremes, flatten out variety, and give us a number that looks precise but means very little. Take income inequality. If one person makes $10 billion and the rest make $30,000, the average might suggest that everyone's doing fine. But no one actually earns the average amount. It's a mathematical mirage. Or consider traffic. If your average speed over a trip is 60 km/h, does that mean you were always going 60? No, maybe you stopped, maybe you sped up, maybe you crawled through city blocks. The average hides the story. The same goes for climate. If the average temperature is 20 degrees C, that could mean it's always mild, or it could mean wild swings between freezing nights and scorching days. The average doesn't show the variability. This paradox becomes dangerous when averages are used to make decisions. Policymakers, doctors, and engineers may rely on average results that don't reflect edge cases. A drug might be safe for the average person, but lethal for a specific group. A bridge might hold under average weight, but collapse under one overloaded truck. There's also the flaw of averages in business planning, assuming the average scenario will happen. But if profits vary wildly from month to month, planning for the average may lead to disaster. Another example, the Simpsons paradox, where trends in averages disappear or even reverse when data is grouped differently. A treatment may seem to help overall, but hurt specific subgroups. Or a player's average performance may look poor overall, but improve in every individual category. And then there's the Lake Wobegon effect, named after a fictional town where all the children are above average. Statistically impossible, yet psychologically familiar. Everyone wants to be above average, but someone must be below. The paradox of averages teaches a simple truth: no one lives in the average. We live in extremes, in fluctuations, in the messy details that the mean number erases. Averages can guide, but they can also mislead. The key is knowing when the average is meaningful and when it's just a mask. So next time someone tells you the average, ask, what's hiding behind it? You wake up every day and you feel like the same person. But are you? Every 7 years, most of your cells have been replaced. Your memories fade, your beliefs shift, your habits change. The person you were 10 years ago, do they still exist? This is the paradox of serial identity, the question of whether you are truly the same person over time, or just a sequence of different versions that feel connected. It's easy to assume continuity. You look in the mirror and say, "That's me." You remember your childhood and feel ownership over it, but memory is fragile. Belief systems evolve. Even your personality can shift. If everything that makes you you is slowly changing, at what point are you no longer the same person? This paradox echoes the ship of Theseus. If every plank on a ship is replaced over time, is it still the same ship? Now apply that to yourself. If every part of your body and mind is slowly altered, are you still you? Philosophers have argued this for centuries. Some say identity is a stream, changing, flowing, but always continuous. Others say it's just an illusion of memory, a trick the brain plays to keep you stable. Still others say that identity is not one thing, but a process, and continuity is just a useful story. But here's the twist. The paradox of serial identity isn't just philosophical, it's emotional. You look back at your past, a decision, a relationship, a failure, and ask, was that really me? Sometimes it feels like it was, like a different person made that choice, and in a way they did. This paradox appears in legal systems too. If someone commits a crime at age 18 but is a completely changed person by 50, are they still responsible in the same way? How do we judge continuity? Or think about regret. You might feel shame for something you did in the past, but if you are no longer that person, why do you carry the guilt? Some neuroscientists suggest that the brain rebuilds itself constantly. Your self-image is reconstructed every moment based on recent input, past memories, and future expectations. You are not a solid thing, you are a pattern, refreshed in real time. So what keeps you intact? Some say it's your narrative, the story you tell about your life. It changes, but it connects the dots. Without that story, your sense of self might fracture. The paradox of serial identity asks a simple but haunting question. If you are always changing, then who are you really? And maybe the answer is, you're not one identity, but a chain of selves, each passing the memory to the next, like a torch in the dark. A young apprentice watches his master cast a spell to animate a broom. The broom begins fetching water for the wizard. Later, when the master is away, the apprentice tries the same spell, but forgets how to stop it. The broom keeps fetching water over and over, flooding the room, unstoppable. This is the paradox of the sorcerer's apprentice, where automation without full understanding leads to unintended consequences. It's not just a story. It's a pattern we see in the real world, especially as we create machines, systems, and technologies that act on their own. The paradox begins with delegation. You automate a task to save time. Maybe it's a machine learning algorithm, a financial bot, a social media recommender. You give it a rule and it follows the rule. The system runs perfectly until the context changes or something unexpected happens and you no longer know how to stop it. In the story, the apprentice's mistake is simple. He can start the process but not stop it. In reality, we often do the same. We create self-sustaining systems, stock market algorithms, AI-driven ad networks, or content engines that act faster than we can track or control. One famous real-world example is the 2010 flash crash. Automated trading algorithms began selling off stocks at high speed due to a small market fluctuation. Human traders couldn't intervene fast enough. The market dropped nearly 1,000 points in minutes, wiping out billions, all caused by a feedback loop no one anticipated. Another example, content recommendation systems on social media. They're programmed to show users more of what they engage with. But over time, this can create echo chambers, radicalize behavior, and distort reality, all because the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's the key to this paradox. The system isn't broken, it's following instructions. But the outcome spirals beyond control because the human never truly understood the full consequences. It raises uncomfortable questions. Should we automate what we don't fully understand? Can a tool be dangerous even if it follows its instructions perfectly? What happens when stopping it becomes harder than starting it? In a world moving rapidly toward AI, machine autonomy, and complex systems, the Sorcerer's Apprentice Paradox is more relevant than ever. It warns us that power without control is risk, that the more we automate, the more we must understand, and that sometimes the biggest danger isn't the machine going rogue, it's the machine doing exactly what it was told. Here's the puzzle. You have a pile of sand, clearly a sandpile. Now, imagine removing one grain, it's still a sandpile. Remove another, still a sandpile. You keep going, one grain at a time. At some point, it's no longer a sandpile, but when exactly did it stop being one? This is the paradox of the sandpile, also known as the Sorites paradox in its meta form. It's a paradox about vagueness, the fuzzy edges of language and categories. It starts with a simple truth. A heap is made of many grains, but how many? Is it 50, 100, 1,000? If you can't say where the heap ends, does it ever truly begin? This paradox exposes how our concepts like heap, bald, tall, or rich are inherently vague. There's no sharp boundary, yet we treat them as if they're real, solid, and definable. Let's look at another example. At what point does a person go from young to old, from poor to rich, from alive to dead? In medicine, law, and ethics, these vague thresholds can mean life-changing decisions, but there's no objective line. One grain doesn't seem to matter, but if that's true for every grain, then removing all grains shouldn't matter either, yet clearly it does. That's the core contradiction. This metaform of the paradox goes deeper than the original. It doesn't just point to a specific fuzzy term, it points to the entire structure of human categorization. It says, the way we use language, the way we divide the world into concepts, is built on assumptions that break down at the edges. You might say, okay, so it's just semantics. But semantics shape laws, policies, identities. How much DNA makes someone your parent? How many years of sentence make a crime serious? How much income makes a person wealthy? Even in digital spaces, the paradox shows up. When does a blurry photo become sharp? When does a color shift from blue to green? When does data become intelligence? One proposed solution is fuzzy logic, a system that allows for degrees of truth. Instead of saying something is either a heap or not, fuzzy logic says it's partially a heap, say 83% heap. But this leads to its own problems. How do you measure heapness? The paradox teaches us that vagueness is baked into thought. We crave clear lines, but the world rarely gives them. Reality comes in gradients, not in checkboxes, so what do we do? Some philosophers say we should accept that most categories are tools, not truths. They help us function, but they don't define the universe. Others argue for redefining terms with strict boundaries, but that often fails in practice. In the end, the paradox of the sandpile reminds us that continuity and change exist on a spectrum, and that most divisions we make are human inventions, useful, but always a little bit wrong. Now we reach the final entry, a paradox about paradoxes themselves. It sounds absurd, but it's very real. It's called the meta paradox, or more simply, the paradox of paradoxes. Here's how it goes. Paradoxes are supposed to reveal contradictions, breakdowns in logic, or gaps in understanding. They confuse us, challenge us, and often leave us without a clear answer. But if that's true, if paradoxes are logical dead ends, then why do they keep helping us understand things better? Why is it that by diving into something that doesn't make sense, we often end up discovering new truths? Why do philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians keep returning to paradoxes and making progress through them? That's the first layer of the meta-paradox. Paradoxes seem to destroy understanding, yet they are one of the most powerful tools for understanding. Now take it deeper. There are paradoxes that we can solve and those we cannot, but how do we decide which is which? Some paradoxes stay unresolved for centuries, only to later become foundational ideas. Others are dismissed as mere wordplay, but the difference isn't always clear. So the meta-paradox asks, what makes a paradox meaningful? And even more disturbingly, what if all reasoning eventually leads to paradox? Take Gödel's incompleteness theorems. They show that any logical system complex enough to include arithmetic will contain true statements that cannot be proven within the system. That's a paradox built into the structure of logic itself. It's not a bug, it's a feature. In a way, logic contains the seeds of its own limits. The more we try to build airtight systems of truth, the more we bump into paradoxes that tell us, you can't go any further from inside this box. Now think about self-reference, a source of many paradoxes. This sentence is false. Is it true? Is it false? It loops forever, but self-reference is everywhere, in language, in consciousness, in artificial intelligence. It's not just a trick, it's built into reality. So here, where the meta-paradox turns into something almost mystical. Paradoxes are problems that should not exist, yet they do. They violate the very rules we depend on, but by studying them, we learn more about the rules themselves. They are like cracks in the surface of logic, showing us where it bends. And if everything leads to paradox, then what does that say about the universe? Is reality itself paradoxical? Is logic incomplete? Is truth something that can never be fully captured, only chased in circles? Even the act of asking these questions becomes self-referential, another paradox. You could say the meta-paradox is the final warning that no system of thought is perfect, that every framework will eventually eat its own tail. But that doesn't mean we stop thinking. It means we embrace paradox as a guide, not a wall. So here, at the end of the list, we find a loop. The paradoxes that began as problems have become paths, and the greatest paradox of all might be this. The only way to understand the universe is to accept that some things will never make sense. For those of you who made it to the very end, I want to know how many of you are still awake, still thinking, still with us. So if you're hearing this right now, go to the comments and write just 2 words, Kasna, nothing else, just that, because I want to see how many of you stayed awake, how many minds are still spinning at this hour. And as a thank you, here's something extra, something we didn't include in the main list. 3 paradoxes that were too short or too strange to make it into the 100, but powerful enough to leave you wondering long after the screen goes dark. First, let's talk about the paradox of inquiry, sometimes called Menno's paradox, and it starts with a question so simple it feels dumb, but it's not. How can you search for something if you don't know what it is? And if you do know what it is, why are you searching in the first place? That's the core loop. If you don't know what you're looking for, you wouldn't recognize it even if you found it, but if you already know it, then the search itself becomes unnecessary. You're stuck between 2 points that cancel each other out. Ignorance makes discovery impossible, but knowledge makes the search pointless. And this isn't just a logic puzzle, it messes with every kind of learning. How do you write a song you've never heard before? How do you paint a feeling you can't describe? How do you solve a problem if you don't even know it exists? And yet we do constantly, instinctively. We search for things we don't understand. We chase ideas without a clear end, and somehow we find them. So the paradox stays alive, whispering underneath everything we learn. Are you discovering something new, or just remembering something you already knew without knowing you knew it? Now let's slide into the second bonus paradox, and this one is strange. It's called the 2 hands paradox, or sometimes just the hand paradox, and it goes like this. Imagine you raise your left hand and your right hand in front of a mirror. What do you see? A reflection, but here's the twist. The image of your left hand looks like a right hand, and your right hand looks like a left. Now think, you can rotate, flip, and spin physical objects in space, but no matter what you do, a left hand can never become a right hand, not truly. They are mirror images, structurally similar but not interchangeable. This leads to a deeper question: why can't the universe flip itself? Why does nature distinguish between left and right? This little visual trick turns into a major scientific problem. It's part of why some molecules work in the body and their mirror versions are toxic. It messes with physics, biology, even chemistry. And on a symbolic level, it's haunting: two things that look the same, feel the same, act the same, but can never become one another. A limit not of distance, but of orientation. The paradox isn't in the hands, it's in the fact that symmetry can break reality. You can reflect forever, but reflection can't reverse identity. Last one now, and this one's personal: the paradox of the self. It's not a riddle, it's not a trick sentence, it's just a quiet loop we all live in. Here it is: how can you observe yourself observing? You can look at a mirror and see your face, you can think about your thoughts, you can describe your behavior, but can you ever truly step outside yourself and see what you are without being you? Every time you try to examine your own mind, you're using the very mind you're trying to examine. It's like trying to see the back of your head without a mirror or bite your own teeth. There's no way to get outside the loop, and yet we keep trying. Meditation, therapy, philosophy, journaling, all of them are versions of the same move, using the self to study the self. So who are you really? The thing being watched or the thing doing the watching? Are you the one thinking or the thoughts themselves? This is the paradox that undercuts identity, consciousness, ego, all of it. It's not scary, but it's humbling. You can spend your whole life trying to figure yourself out, and every insight you gain changes the self you thought you understood. The paradox doesn't destroy you, it expands you. You're never a fixed point. You're the observer and the observed, the loop that watches itself run, the sentence that rewrites itself while you're reading it.